Lim Yong considers herself to have some beauty, but Namwol is prettier by several degrees. A face bright and grand and gallant, a figure slender and exquisite. The sort countless male cultivators dream about. So junior brother Ryuk likes the pretty ones. When that thought surfaced, she felt like crying and held it down firmly. Blank as her brain was, her gaze still lifted on its own, cautious, going first to me and then to Jin Namwol. Jin Namwol, still stunned, caught that faint lingering look from beside her, and her chest tightened. It was a careful gaze with bitterness hidden in it, pretending not to care and unable to stop watching, like a small animal guarding its territory without daring to make a sound. An inexplicable panic came up in Jin Namwol, the guilt of someone caught doing something she should not. She steadied her face, looked up at me and forced out a smile. Giving a top-tier magic artifact to her meant she got the same treatment as Yang now, she teased. So did I really intend to have both sisters? Then before I could answer, her face went dark and her voice dropped every bit of humor out of it, and she said no, that if I did that she would be angry. What did that mean? Does handing over a top-tier magic artifact somehow lower favorability? I checked the module with actual nerves in my stomach, and found Jin Namwol sitting at 72. A question mark unfolded slowly in my head, because that was up 12 points from the 60 she had been carrying a few minutes earlier, which is not a decline, that is a surge. And yet the words "I am very angry" were written across every line of her face. Are women's minds always this complicated? Her behavioral logic defeated me entirely, and without the favorability numbers in front of me, I would have been certain I had ruined something important. Jin Namwol saw my blank face and my confusion, and an unprovoked panic went through her, followed by a reluctance she had not asked for. She pressed her lips together and let her gaze drift sideways, not daring to meet mine at all. Then something occurred to her and she lifted her chin. Since the red sash suited her, she said softly, the gold-white sword-marked sash could be her bid on my behalf, and we could call it an exchange. I looked at the serious set of her expression, her chin up and her red lips pressed into a line, and none of it looked like discussion. It was a position with no room in it for negotiation. I thought about it and nodded and said that worked too. The gold-white sword-marked sash is not worth as much as the cinnabar sword-binding sash, but I would not be paying for it, and I will take a free magic artifact any day of the week. Jin Namwol let out a breath at last, crossed her arms, lifted her chin, and said with deliberate nonchalance that this counted as barter and not as me giving her a top-tier magic artifact. While she said it, the corner of her eye was quietly on Lim Yong. Lim Yong seemed to feel the attention, looked up, and a gentle smile came over her pretty face like a spring breeze putting ripples on water. The stone in Jin Namwol's chest finally hit the ground, her shoulders came down, and her breathing went long and even again. Accepting a top-tier magic artifact from me would have been no different from stealing a man out of her good sister's hands, and hurting Lim Yong was unthinkable. Fortunately, she thought, this Ryuk Young had not made her lose face over it. I had been watching her favorability the entire time. When the number quietly ticked up 3 more and reached 75, I simply went numb. Women are genuinely complex creatures, and I cannot understand them. Not even a little. I gave up trying on the grounds that the number went up, and that is the part which counts. While the 3 of us were sorting all that out, the bidding for the gold-white sword-marked sash had gone white-hot. The starting price of 10,000 low-grade spirit stones was left far behind in the first round, and 15, 18, and 21,000 went past like a lit fuse, running uphill. An early-stage foundation establishment loose cultivator clenched his fists until the veins stood out on the backs of his hands. Then he let them go and cursed quietly that it was over 20,000, and his life savings would not cover a bid. His companion smiled wryly, shook his head, and saved the breath it would have taken to answer. Nobody sitting on that floor was qualified anymore. A warm, thick voice from a 4th-floor room called 23,000, and 24 and 25 followed, the shouts rising and falling while the number of shouters kept shrinking. At 30,000, the room went briefly quiet, and Martial Aunt Yu had already started her countdown before anyone raised it again. Even for the VIP rooms, the price of a top-tier magic artifact was reaching its limit, and past that, the arithmetic simply stops working. Then 31,000 came out of private room number 9 on the 3rd floor, and for a moment, nobody followed it. Martial Aunt Yu curled her red lips and pushed. This was a top-tier sash, magic artifact for a sword cultivator, she said, and in all her years of hosting, she had not seen one in a decade. 31,000, she said. Was there any more? And she began counting from 3. Inside the 9th room on the 3rd floor, the boy had his fists clenched and his eyes fixed on the platform with his whole body drawn tight. His cousin picked up a teacup, sipped it, and told him calmly not to be nervous, that the price was almost at its limit already. The boy shot him a resentful look and pointed out, quietly, that he had said exactly the same thing about the top-grade yellow dragon pills earlier. His cousin's expression stiffened, and embarrassment crossed his face. The two were not the same at all, he said irritably, since everyone can use top-grade pills while only a sword cultivator needs a sash, which leaves far fewer competitors. He was halfway through saying that this time it was certain when a crisp female voice called, 32,000. The boy whipped around toward our box with fire practically coming out of his eyes, and demanded to know whether the 15th room on the second floor was targeting his cousin on purpose. The young man frowned. The bidder was a young miss of the direct Jin family line, he said, and the Lee family and the Jin family have no grudges, so why would they target him? Lee Yo said resentfully that then why did they raise the price every single time? And how could that possibly be coincidence? His cousin, Lee Peng, set the teacup down and let his tone sink. He did not know how Lee Yo's parents had spoiled him at home, but this is the GM Hong sword sect, and no rule at an auction forbids other people from bidding. If he did not change that temperament of his, trouble would come down on his own head sooner or later. Lee Yo lowered his eyes and said nothing, and disagreed completely on the inside. The Lee family is a Golden Core clan with an old ancestor standing at peak Golden Core. Among all the Golden Core forces under the Geom Hong sword sect, it ranks at the very top. So what trouble could find him? He privately thought this cousin of his was a coward, timid out in the world, carrying none of the bearing a great family's disciple ought to have. Lee Peng looked at that dismissive face and frowned. He would write a family letter as soon as he got back and talk properly about Lee Yo's problems, because the boy has been thoroughly spoiled. Then he thought about Lee Yo's parents and felt helpless again, since his uncle and aunt are not easy people either. Lee Yo's voice pulled him back, urgent, pointing out that the countdown had already started, and asking whether they were still going to bid. Lee Peng came back to himself and considered it honestly, but the boy's expectant face was sitting right there, so he called 32,500. Jin Namwol's voice followed without a pause. At 33,000, Lee Peng shook his head, leaned back into his chair, and said the direct daughter of the Jin family was determined to win, so competing further was pointless. Leo frowned and complained that his cousin had promised him a gift for joining the sect, and asked why they were stopping. Lee Peng looked at him and answered more seriously. The price had passed the point of being worth it, and the Lee family's foundation is not thin, but spirit stones do not blow in on the wind. Every stone which should be spent will be, and money that should not be spent cannot be wasted. The evil fire in Leo's chest flared up instantly and he clamped it down, grinding his back teeth and swallowing the insults whole. If he were not short on cash, he would never have come here to be lectured, and having to listen to that nagging every single time was maddening beyond words. He glanced unwillingly toward the 15th private room on the second floor with gloom passing through his eyes. The Jin family is not much weaker than the Lee family, so there was truly nothing he could do in that direction. That left the boy who had bought the top-grade yellow dragon pills earlier. Lee Yo decided he would find out exactly what that one's background was, and if it turned out to be nothing, nobody could blame him for being impolite. He had been perfectly comfortable in the Lee family with everything he wanted. Then the old men insisted on stuffing him into the Jumhong sword sect for further study, as if this place could ever be as carefree as home. While Lee Yo was busy being annoyed, Marshal Aunt Yu's countdown ran out. A seductive smile bloomed across her face, and her voice lifted as she congratulated the VIP in the 15th private room on the second floor on winning the gold-white sword-marked sash. Inside our box, Jin Namwol's tense body loosened, and she leaned back, exhaled, and laughed that it was fine, well within her acceptable range. I looked at her with half a smile and asked whether the money was enough, or whether she needed to borrow some after all. Embarrassment crossed her face because her own teasing line had come the whole way around, and stabbed her. She said indignantly that I should not worry, since it was just barely enough. Then she made a pained expression and muttered that after paying she would have under 500 spirit stones left to her name. Lim Yeong took Jin Namwol's hand and smiled gently and offered to lend her some spirit stones to tide her over, calling her Namwol the way she always does. Jin Namwol threw her arms around her at once, buried her face in her shoulder, and declared that her young is the best to her. She had already calculated that once her family sends resources after the new year, she would return more than she borrowed and call the difference interest. A girl scraping savings together through alchemy should not be left that short. Lim Young patted Jin Namwol's back gently, a faint smile on her gentle face, and told her to get up because junior brother Yuk was watching. Jin Namwol's body stiffened, since she had been carried away and had genuinely forgotten I was sitting an arm's length from them. Shyness came up out of her and she sat straight, straightened her collar and pretended nothing had occurred, while Lim Young watched with her lips curving softly. Jin Namwol felt the watching, could not stand it, and asked what was wrong, and Lim Young shook her head and said nothing was, and that the next lot had already started. I sat off to the side taking all of that in, and touched my nose without meaning to. The two of them really do have a good relationship. I found myself wondering idly whether things would turn even more harmonious once both favorability numbers reached their maximum value. That thought ran hotter than it had any right to, so I set it aside and put my attention back on the stage. Since the gold-white sword-marked sash, the quality of the lots had visibly stepped up a level. Top-grade talismans started appearing, though the quantities were small and the prices low, so I could not raise any interest in moving on them. Soon another top-tier magic artifact came up, this time a fire Dao piece, which is not much use to a man preparing to cultivate both the sword Dao and the metal Dao. If you are not walking the corresponding Dao, that kind of artifact can only exert its own power and cannot resonate with your own techniques, so the value takes a discount. Most of the Jiamhung sword sect cultivators in the room follow the sword Dao or the metal Dao. The bidding came in colder than expected and closed at 28,000 low-grade spirit stones, a good chunk under the sash. When the hammer fell, what martial art you brought up next was a second-tier treasure. I frowned slightly and asked whether the first-tier lots were already finished. Jin Namwol answered casually that they more or less were. Today's first-tier segment had carried several rare spirit medicines and ores along with 2 top-tier magic artifacts, so the gold content had not been low. I had planned on bidding for another more expensive top-tier magic artifact, and the first-tier run had simply ended on me while I was doing arithmetic. I hesitated with my eyes on the second-tier treasure and considered buying one anyway. Second-tier prices only go higher, which fits the spending requirement of the intermediate rebate card in my hand perfectly, and while I do not need one now, that does not mean I never will. Anything that caught me would get a bid, and failing that, the 100,000 low-grade spirit stones would keep and convert into SEC contribution points later, which comes to the same thing in the end. The money has to go out one way or another, or the tycoon's confidence does not climb. The few thousand-stone lots counted as ordinary goods. Plenty crossed 10,000, and 2 or 3 were called up past 50,000. Round after round went by without a single item moving my heart even slightly. I leaned back with my fingers tapping the armrest, and let myself feel mildly cheated. Then a mysterious smile appeared on Martial Aunt Yu's face up on the platform. Her voice dropped to something like a lover's whisper, teasing and hard to pin down, as she said the final treasure was next, and that even she was tempted. The atmosphere in the venue changed the instant she said it. The loose cultivators on the first floor, who had spent the whole evening gasping at prices, straightened on instinct, and small movements ran through the VIP rooms. I pulled myself out of my lazy slouch as well, because a finale item ought to carry some weight. She took a small wooden bottle from her storage pouch and turned it for the room to see, pinched between fair fingers. It was no thicker than a thumb, warm and moist as jade, with a faint cyan luster under the surface. The spirit lamps put a halo around it that no ordinary object earns. Her voice carried undisguised excitement as she reminded everyone that a cultivator's divine sense is critical, and that when breaking through to golden core in the sense soul, it is the key of all keys. Before she could finish, a Foundation Establishment loose cultivator downstairs called out to ask whether it was a treasure that enhances divine sense. She curved her lips into a smile charming enough to skip a few hearts, and confirmed it. A supreme treasure for enhancing divine sense. 1 drop of 1,000-year-old azure void jade liquid. She went on unhurried. A young friend at Chi Refining who took it had a very high chance of awakening divine sense outright, and anyone at Foundation Establishment would have their divine sense greatly strengthened. The silence lasted a single breath before heavy breathing broke it everywhere, and every gaze in the building fastened onto that little wooden bottle hard enough to set the air alight. Inside our box, Jin Namwol drew a deep breath, her voice shaking with shock she could not hide. It was actually azure void jade liquid, she said, and who would ever auction a heaven and earth treasure of that grade? A frown creased her gallant face, and gloom followed it, and she said bluntly that the item was too expensive and she could not afford it. Lim Young took it much more calmly, smiling lightly and saying with a detached ease that she could not have afforded it either way, so she would simply treat the whole thing as a show. Jin Naomol shot her an annoyed look and pointed out that this is a spiritual item which lets you awaken divine sense during chi refining, and asked whether she really did not want it. Lim Yon pursed her lips gently, smiled, and said she knows her own limits, and that this is not a thing she can reach. Jin Namwol opened her mouth and found, for a moment, that she had nothing at all to answer that with. Then something occurred to her, and she turned to me and asked whether junior brother Ryuk meant to bid. I nodded with flames going in my eyes and said of course I did. Azure Void Jade Liquid is a rare opportunity for me too, and having run into it there was no reason on this earth to let it slide past me. Jin Namwol was quiet a moment and then said with real regret that the final price would probably exceed 80,000. She asked whether I had enough spirit stones. If she had known, that sash would have stayed on the platform and the money would have been saved for me to bid with. I laughed and told her it was fine, that I still had some on me. Counting everything up, I held a little over 100,000 low-grade spirit stones, and if the price climbed much past that I would genuinely miss out. Nothing earlier in the auction had suited me though, and spending 100,000 on something useless purely to trigger a rebate would be too wasteful even for me. She announced Azure Void Jade Liquid at a starting price of 20,000 low-grade spirit stones, with increments no smaller than 2,000, and declared the bidding open. Before the words had faded, a cold and different voice drifted down from a private room on the 4th floor and said, 50,000. The whole hall, which had been on the edge of boiling, cooled as though somebody had emptied a basin of ice water over it. In the 1st floor hall, a Foundation establishment loose cultivator froze with his palm already in the air, his lips twitching twice before he silently put his hand back down. In the 9th room on the 3rd floor, Li Peng had his mouth open with a bid stuck in his throat, and he stayed that way a long while before closing it. Beside him, Li Yo, all fervor a breath earlier, wore an expression stiff enough to crack. Li Peng smiled bitterly and leaned back. They should give up, he said with real helplessness. And it was not that he was unwilling to bid for his cousin, but a starting call of 50,000 was beyond them. Leo's face twisted with unwillingness in his eyes as he stared up at the 4th floor and asked quietly who that was and whether the status of the 4th floor rooms must be very high. This time, unusually, his temper stayed exactly where it was, because he knew perfectly well that anyone seated on the 4th floor has an Ascent Soul True Monarch standing behind them. Arrogant as he is, Leo has a working brain, and he was mostly curious and a little envious about why the Li family could not produce an Ascent Soul True Monarch of its own. Li Peng looked up at the 4th floor box as well, his gaze complicated, reverence in it, and a thread of fervor he could not quite conceal. That was the strongest genius the Guham Sword Sect has produced in several hundred years, he said. Leo should stop thinking about it, because with her in the building nobody else was likely to get a chance. Leo repeated the phrase, stunned. And then lightning went through his mind and his eyes widened as he asked whether it could be Senior Marshal Ant Mok, the prodigy with the supergrade spiritual root. Late as he entered the sect, that name had spread across the whole of Jin province 4 years ago. It had not stopped at GM Hong Sword Sect territory either, since the other 5 top powers were all talking about that supergrade spiritual root. Li Peng nodded and said it was her. The unwillingness in Li Yo's eyes faded into longing. He had heard Senior Marshal Ant Mok is extremely beautiful, like a fairy come down into the mortal world, and he wondered aloud who would eventually catch her eye. Before he could finish the sentence, Li Peng shuddered violently, exactly like a man pricked by a needle. His face ran through green and white, and his voice came out through gritted teeth, low and urgent. He demanded to know whether Li Yo had lost his mind. Senior Marshal Ant Mok is not somebody he can discuss, and if he wants to die, he can leave the rest of them out of it. Privately, he wished he could slap this ignorant cousin of his to death. Li Yo came to his senses as well. However little he thinks of his cousin's attitude, he understood what he had just said. He forced a smile and told Li Peng he had only been talking idly. Li Peng could not stop his own gaze from stealing back up toward the 4th floor room. In the dim light, he kept feeling that behind that half-hung gauze curtain, a gaze was settling on them without any hurry at all. His back went cold and wet in an instant. His voice came out hoarse when he told Leo not to even think about it, because Senior Marshal Ant Mok was not someone he got to think about. Leo frowned and let the fire in his chest flare, and crushed it down and muttered, dissatisfied, about not even being allowed to think. Halfway through the mutter, Li Peng's telepathic transmission arrived in his ear, cold, saying that Senior Marshal Ant Mok's guardian is a peak Golden Core Sect elder. He turned his stiff neck to look at his cousin with disbelief on his face and swallowed without meaning to, a fine layer of cold sweat coming up along his forehead. A peak Golden Core elder standing guard is functionally the same as the Li family old ancestor standing guard. The GM Hong Sword Sect does not do meaningless things. Assigning a peak Golden Core elder to a young disciple can only mean that in the eyes of those lofty true monarchs, Senior Marshal Ant Mok is worth exactly that much protection. In other words, they consider it settled that she will become an Ascent Soul True Monarch, and possibly that she will touch the threshold of soul transformation. Leo shivered and tasted real fear for the first time in his life, and lowered his voice and said he understood. Li Peng let his breath out slowly, with the tension still sitting in his tone, and answered that it was good that he knew. He was genuinely afraid this idiot would drag the whole Li family into deep water with his loose tongue. If even one of the Jum Hong Sword Sect's Ascent Soul True Monarchs decided to take a walk, the Li family would cease to exist. Out in the hall, the rest of the room was recovering from that single 50,000. It was not a low number, but for Azure Void Jade Liquid, it was plainly nowhere near the ceiling. In a 3rd floor room, an old man in the robes of a Jahum Sword Sect elder looked up toward the 4th floor. He was thin-faced, temples gone gray, eye sockets slightly sunken, with a sharp, intimidating glint still in his eyes. He muttered to himself that she wanted it too, and that very well, if one must compete, then compete one must. His days were numbered, but a talented sapling had come up among the juniors, and arrangements had to be made for that child's future. The GM Hong Sword Sect is an upright sect with strict rules, and once an item goes onto the auction platform, there is no reason anyone must yield to anyone else. Just as they were preparing to push the price higher, I said 100,000 in roughly the tone a man uses for saying 10. Leo made a sound with no words in it, and Li Peng made a similar one. On the third floor, several people nearly lost hold of their teacups, and the whole hall behaved as though a finger had come down on it, every head turning at once toward the second floor. Leo's eyes went green as he demanded whether that was the 15th room on the second floor again, and whether that kid could actually produce 100,000 low-grade spirit stones. Leo was not the only one in his family who needed to cultivate. As a direct descendant, his annual resources were real enough, but producing 100,000 spirit stones in one motion at Qi refining was out of the question. Even Li Peng, a foundation establishment, could not have done it easily, because plenty comes in and plenty has to go straight back out. And the boy in the second floor box had shouted 100,000 without so much as blinking over it. Behind the gauze curtain on the fourth floor, a rare trace of surprise crossed Senior Marshal Aunt Mock's cold, jade-like face. She lowered her eyes and let her gaze pass through the half-hung curtain toward that second-floor room. On the platform, the warm yellow halo of the spirit lamps came down like thin veiling and laid a lustrous glow over the whole white jade stage. Marshal Aunt Yu lifted her eyes toward the 15th box on the second floor, with surprise flitting through her shimmering peach blossom eyes. For the very first lot, this person had crushed the competition with a price gap wide enough to hurt. 25,000 low-grade spirit stones for 5 bottles of top-grade yellow dragon pill. She has watched a great many scions of great families throw money around across her years of hosting, and even by that standard, the number had been extravagant. She had not expected the same person to hand her a bigger surprise on the grand finale. Azure Void Jade liquid is famously rare, but it was only a 1,000-year specimen and only a single drop. The price should not have gone outrageous, and the closing range she had run in her head sat between 85 and 88,000. Instead, the bidding opened, and the man immediately declared 100,000. That is not an auction anymore. That is somebody stepping on the entire venue. She leaned forward a little, the neckline of her red dress swaying with a subtle curve as she moved, and her voice drifted out slowly under the warm-colored lamps. She announced 100,000 from the guest in the 15th box on the second floor and asked for higher bids, and reminded the room that this is Azure Void Jade liquid after all. Especially, she said, for those with juniors at Qi refining at home. A single drop lets a junior awaken divine sense early and lays a solid divine sense foundation, so the road ahead runs longer and steadier than it does for anyone else. She paused and swept the venue slowly, as though speaking privately to every single person in it, and then began her countdown at 3. The hall dropped into a thick, viscous silence where nobody spoke, and even the breathing was deliberately held down. The lamplight lay across every face and showed all the complication in it, envy and unwillingness, and the flat indifference of people who have finished watching a show. In the 9th box on the 3rd floor, Leo had a spirit fruit gripped so hard the flesh of it had deformed and sticky juice was running between his fingers without his noticing. Li Peng glanced at his cousin's unpredictable face and spoke quietly. A cultivator who can produce 100,000 low-grade spirit stones at once almost certainly has an extraordinary power behind him. So Leo's chest heaved a few times before he closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He forced his voice out through his teeth and said he knew. He would make contact through the Jin family descendant first, and have someone probe the man's background besides. Seeing that his cousin was angry but still rational, Li Peng nodded slightly and withdrew his gaze. The cultivators in the other boxes, having sat through Marshal Aunt Yu's emotional speech, twitched their mouths with speechlessness all over their faces. Everyone knows Azure Void Jade liquid is a good thing. The problem is having the money to buy it. 100,000 low-grade spirit stones is enough to bankrupt a small family out in the world. Throwing all of it away for a single drop of 1,000-year Azure Void Jade liquid does not add up. However, the numbers are run. The same pile buys 2 or 3 top-tier magic artifacts outright, and with a little luck it stretches to a medium-grade spiritual artifact instead. In the 4th floor box, Senior Marshal Aunt Mock's frost-cold eyes watched through the gauze curtain as Marshal Aunt Yu moved toward closing the deal. Behind her, the old man with gray-white hair turned slightly and asked in a low voice whether Junior Mock still intended to bid. She was silent for a few breaths, the lamplight on her porcelain white profile drawing out those exquisite contours, her expression as indifferent as a doll's. Then she shook her head gently and said to forget it. Azure Void Jade liquid can only increase divine sense strength for her, and for 100,000 low-grade spirit stones she could raise it further by other means. The cultivation resources her master gives her are abundant enough to make other people bitter. She has never once been willing to squander them, because the only question she asks about anything is whether it is worth the price. The old man glanced toward the 15th box on the 2nd floor, said nothing further, and let his eyes close. The countdown ran out quickly after that. Marshal Aunt Yu congratulated the distinguished guest in the 15th box on the 2nd floor, her smile blooming and the joy in her voice undisguised. The evening's total had run far past what she expected, and her commission along with it. She clasped her hands together gently, her red cuff sliding back to reveal a wrist pale enough to dazzle. Then she blinked, and a perfectly timed touch of reluctance and regret appeared on her charming face, and she softened her voice like a spring breeze going past the ear. Time passes so quickly, she told them, and the auction ended here. She truly wished she could stay with all her fellow Taoists a while longer, and hoped that at the same time next year she would see every one of them again. The cultivators in the first floor hall stood and began filing out, footsteps and whispers and rustling clothing blending into one low noisy wave. The spirit lamps in the box area went out one by one, and light and shadow crawled slowly along the corridor. I leaned back and listened to the footsteps outside going from near to far and from dense to sparse, my face as flat as deep water. None of the three of us had any intention of getting up, since what I had bought had not been delivered yet. Both women still looked dazed with their eyes slightly unfocused, as though they had not entirely broken free of that 100,000. The air in the box under the lamps was so quiet we could hear each other breathing unevenly. Lim Young pressed her red lips together until her pearly teeth left a shallow white mark on them. She lifted those gentle water-like eyes, stole a look at me, and dropped her gaze fast, and the inferiority came climbing back up her throat. He opens his mouth and 100,000 low-grade spirit stones comes out, and there's not a ripple on his face, and it is not performed calm either, because he genuinely does not care. How much money does he actually have, and how strong is the thing standing behind him? She felt suddenly that she and I are people out of two different worlds, with a chasm between us she could never cross however hard she tried. Jin Namwol, usually the carefree one, had a good number of ripples going in her own chest. Being able to produce it at mid-stage chi refining is rare enough to count as a freak of nature. Loose cultivators should not even think about it, and even she, with a great cultivation family like the Jin family behind her, would need some advanced preparation to mobilize that many stones in one motion. And I had said 100,000 as flatly as a man says 10. She looked at my profile and found her heartbeat picking up a few extra beats without asking her permission. After a few breaths of silence, she could not hold it in any longer, and blurted out my full name and asked whether I had some top-tier nascent soul power standing behind me. Lim Young's slight frame trembled, and her head came up, those clear eyes wide, staring at me in astonishment. I had not expected Senior Sister Jin's mind to run in that direction. I waved a hand somewhere between laughing and despairing, and told her she was badly overthinking it. She rolled her eyes and curled her red lips, and her face wrote out very clearly that she did not believe a single word of it. I could only sigh. Senior Sister Jin is excellent at everything except restraining her imagination. She had already dragged nascent soul powers into it, and if I let her keep associating freely, she would end up suspecting some reclusive soul transformation expert of being my ancestor. If the elders of the Ryuk family ever learned that their family had been promoted to a nascent soul power in Senior Sister Jin's mouth, the shock alone would probably finish them where they stood. Then somebody knocked gently at the box door, and Jin Namwol composed her expression and called for them to come in. The door opened on the same maid as before, with Deacon Son of the auction house behind her. Behind him, which is the part that made all three of us pause at once, came a figure in a swaying red dress. Jin Namwol recovered first, stood up out of her chair with a polite smile piling onto her face, and asked why Marshal Aunt Yu had come herself. She understands exactly how much weight that woman carries. As the daughter of an elder of the External Affairs Hall, with her auction prices setting new records over and over, her standing in that hall is extraordinary. Running an errand to deliver one bottle of Azure Void Jade liquid was in no way worth troubling her. The moment Marshal Aunt Yu stepped into the box, her gaze went to me without her choosing it. The soft lamplight fell over the young man in front of her and drew his outline clean and bright. A high straight nose bridge, thin lips slightly pressed, eyes she read as full of the broken stars of a deep winter sky. He was simply standing there, and yet like a magnet he dragged her gaze over, and her heartbeat skipped a beat. After years of greeting and seeing off guests, she has met countless young talents, and considers herself immune to a handsome face. This junior disciple, by her private judgment, was unfairly good-looking. As a woman skilled at socializing, she lost her focus for exactly one moment before her expression returned to normal. Her gaze moved naturally across Jin Namwol and Lim Yang, and she clicked her tongue inwardly because both of them are rare beauties with entirely different charms. One gallant and dashing, one gentle as water, standing on the left and the right of this handsome young man, and the composition was frankly pleasing to look at. This junior disciple, she thought, is enjoying the blessings of having both. Her smile did not slip a hair while she thought it. She nodded at Jin Namwol in a friendly way, her voice soft and carrying a natural intimacy, and said she had naturally come to escort the Azure Void Jade liquid over. And, she added, to personally hand the VIP token to the junior disciple who had just placed that bid. Jin Namwol had run the arithmetic twice before the box door finished closing, and both times it came out the same. His spending tonight had cleared 100,000 low-grade spirit stones by a comfortable margin, which under the auction house's own rules, earned a low-level VIP token outright. Her chest tightened in a way she did not enjoy. For years, she had attended every single auction and built her transaction volume up a sliver at a time, scraping that token together with an effort nobody had ever thanked her for. Junior brother Ryuk had walked through the door for the first time in his life and collected one in a single evening. Measuring yourself against other people really is a fine way to ruin a night. She ground her teeth in private and could not decide whether she felt more envious or more depressed. Lim Yong, standing beside her, had none of that going on. She had never owned a VIP token and had never once let herself want one, so the number went past her without leaving a mark. She stood quietly off to the side instead, watching Ryuk Yang's profile in a lamplight and thinking that junior brother Ryuk really was something else. On my side of the box, I had just remembered the same rule, and the smile got out before I could stop it. Martial Aunt Yu was looking straight at me when it happened. Her heartbeat tripped over itself, and she felt something knock gently against the inside of her chest, which was an outrageous thing for a Foundation establishment cultivator to admit even privately. She drew a quiet breath and pushed the flutter back down where it belonged. Then the professional mask slid back into place, red dress, peach blossom eyes and all. She drew a finely grained wooden bottle and a low-level VIP token from her storage pouch and offered both to me with two hands. She said she still did not know this junior disciple's name, and her voice came out sweet as poured honey. She explained that a junior disciple who could spend that lavishly while still in the outer sect ought to be known to her. Having no impression of me at all counted, she said, as a dereliction of duty at the External Affairs Hall. I caught the probe and did not mind it in the slightest. I took the items, greeted her as Martial Aunt Yu, and told her my name was Ryuk Yang. She repeated the two syllables to herself and tilted her head until a strand of that bright red hair ribbon slipped off her shoulder. Then she said she would remember me, and that she hoped to see junior disciple Ryuk at next year's auction. I told her I would definitely be there, and I meant it. There was a whole year before the next one, which is more than enough time to accumulate a fresh stack of rebate cards. An event where single transactions run into the hundreds of thousands is a stage built for exactly what those cards do. I glanced down at the wooden bottle without letting my expression change. It was small and heavier than it looked, carved over with fine spirit sealing array patterns, and when my fingertips crossed the grain, I felt a cool ripple of spiritual energy underneath. Azure Void Jade Liquid, the treasure that awakens divine sense ahead of schedule. Then the system spoke up without warning, in that patient shopkeeper's register it uses when it is about to hand me something absurd. It said the host had spent lavishly at this auction, achieved a bountiful harvest, and enjoyed the pleasure of consumption, and that the reward was one intermediate storage ring and one flowing light flying boat. My pupils shrank a fraction, and my face stayed exactly where it was. A storage ring sits several grades above a storage pouch, and a flying boat is a transportation magic treasure that a Foundation establishment cultivator would think twice about buying. My hands itched to pull up the details and read every attribute line by line. With Martial Aunt Yu and Jin Namwol standing right there, I folded the panel away instead and kept smiling like a man thinking about dinner. Martial Aunt Yu showed no sign of leaving. Her gaze shifted, and those alluring eyes blinked once at me. She suggested with easy familiarity that since junior disciple Ryuk was a disciple of the sect too, perhaps we ought to exchange sound transmission marks. She added that before the next auction opened, she might be able to tell me in advance what was going under the hammer. Jin Namwol and Lim Yeong both looked up at the same instant, and both of them went very slightly rigid. A Foundation establishment martial aunt volunteering her sound transmission mark was not nothing. For one breath, the air in the box stopped moving. Then the second half of the sentence registered, and both of them let out the same quiet breath at the same moment. It was about the auction. Put that way, it was entirely ordinary, since my attitude tonight had been that spirit stones are an infinite resource, and that is the exact customer every auctioneer alive dreams of keeping. Lim Yong still pressed her red lips together and lowered her head, and the lamplight laid a small shadow under her lashes. Something sour turned over inside her, a slow invisible twist, and she knew perfectly well that nothing existed between herself and junior brother Ryuk yet, and the sourness came anyway. She curled her fists inside her sleeves and was quietly ashamed of herself for it. Jin Namwol, meanwhile, was having an earthquake she refused to name. She could not work out why she had tensed up at all. This kid was her good friend, nothing more, so there was no reason on earth for her pulse to do that. Her mind raced through explanations and seized the first one that held together. Obviously, it was because of Young, since that girl's heart was tied to him hand and foot, and as Young's best sister, she naturally did not want to watch her get hurt. The logic was airtight, she decided, and her chest loosened considerably. I had not expected the offer, and I was delighted to take it. Martial Aunt Yu is a 9-point beauty by the system's own accounting, and adding her contact details meant a favorability reward on top of everything else. I told her it was no trouble at all and that I would have to impose on her to keep me informed about future lots. This time I got lucky and ran into the Azure Void Jade liquid on my very first visit. If something I truly wanted came up next year while somebody contested me head-on and my purse was short, that would be a genuine problem. We traded marks. She said her goodbyes to all three of us, and her red dress turned in a swirl as she went out with Deacon Sun and the attendant. The door clicked shut and a leftover tension went out with her. I looked at the two of them and said we should go as well. Jin Namwol stretched hugely, arms over her head and her back bending into a flexible arc. She groaned that she had been sitting all day, that it was finally over, and that we should get back and cultivate. Lim Young's mouth curved, and she observed that Namwol simply wanted to go home and refine that cinnabar sword-binding sash. Jin Namwol stiffened, caught out, and her earlobes went quietly red. She laughed a dry little laugh and defended herself, saying that anyone who gets a new top-tier magic artifact naturally wants to refine it and learn the feel of it immediately. Then she demanded whether I did not want to rush back and refine my own gold-white sword-marked sash. I turned my head, let my eyes rest on Lim Young for a moment, and told Jin Namwol I was not in that much of a hurry. Her face darkened. She folded her arms, pursed her lips, and said sourly that I valued romance over friendship, that nothing had even happened yet and I was already taking Young's side. Lim Young's cheeks colored and she scolded her softly for talking nonsense. Night had come down completely by the time we cleared the auction house gate. The evening wind came off the mountains carrying green, growing smells, and the high moon poured over the bluestone plaza until the ground gave back a warm jade sheen. Then a gentle, refined voice called out from a little way off, greeting junior disciple Jin and remarking that it had been a long time. Two men were walking toward us under the moonlight, one behind the other, both with sword-shaped brows and bright eyes and both handsome enough to notice. The one in front wore the plain robe of an israqsg disciple and walked unhurriedly. The teenager at his shoulder was a different animal entirely. When his gaze swung across us, it carried arrogance and hostility with no attempt to hide either. Jin Namwol raised an eyebrow and saluted, saying she had not expected to run into Marshal Uncle Lee here. She turned and introduced him briefly, telling us this was Marshal Uncle Lee of the Lee family, a Golden Core clan and israqsg disciple of Gumguang Peak. Then she told him that we too were her good friends, Ryuk Yang and Lim Yang. I filed that away and returned the salute along with Lim Yam. Li Peng inclined his head, his expression as smooth as a flawless piece of white jade, and gestured for us to rise. In a voice warm as a spring wind, he said, was his cousin Leo, who had entered the sect only this year. Leo nodded at us. When his eyes crossed Lim Yang and Jin Namwol, a flicker of surprise showed plainly. Under the moonlight, the two of them had their own separate kinds of beauty, one gentle as water and the other bracingly gallant, and he took a few more looks than were strictly polite. Then he remembered why he had come, and his gaze landed on me and stayed there, openly measuring, with no attempt to soften it. Surnamed Ryuk, he was flipping through his memory for the famous powerhouses and major sects of Jin province, with that surname and finding nothing at all. Being stared at like that is unpleasant, and my brows drew together. I looked straight back into his eyes and asked junior brother Li Yo, in a level voice with a little frost in it, why he was looking at me that way. Li Peng's expression twitched, and he swore inwardly. A sound transmission went into his cousin's ear immediately, sharp and stern, telling him to restrain himself and not to forget why they were here. Leo pursed his lips and pulled his eyes off the man whose background he could not place. When he turned toward me, the corner of his mouth lifted in a deliberate, provocative curve, a silent announcement that he did not consider me worth seeing. Li Peng carried on as though the last few seconds had not occurred. He smiled and brought the conversation back around, saying junior disciple Ryuk had shown brilliantly at the auction tonight, so they had been in the hall watching me the whole time. I kept my face where it was and told him he was too kind. He shook his head slightly and said that was not flattery. The bidding on those 5 bottles of top-grade yellow dragon pills still left him savoring it, decisive and clean and carrying a domineering air. Jin Namwol frowned very faintly at that. Lim Young's eyes sharpened and she drifted half a step closer to me without noticing she had done it. I looked quietly at the two of them under the moonlight, kept every extra emotion out of my eyes, and told Marshal Uncle Lee to say whatever he had come to say. Li Peng had not opened his mouth before his cousin cut across him. The youth's voice carried an undisguised flippancy that sounded particularly ugly in the silence, asking why, since I had 5 bottles of top-grade yellow dragon pills anyway, I did not simply let them have one. Li Peng's face went dark and his fingers closed inside his sleeve. He shot the boy a hard glance, and a voice transmission drove into Leo's sea of consciousness telling him to shut his mouth and let the talking be handled by an adult. Leo curled his lip, entirely unrepentant, and went on staring at me with the serene entitlement of someone who has never once been told no. Li Peng breathed in, pressed the irritation out from between his brows, and had the gentle smile hum back up before he faced me again. He said that going by tonight's transaction price, a bottle of top-grade yellow dragon pills ran 5,000 low-grade spirit stones. They were willing to pay 5,300 for one, and he asked what I thought. Jin Namwol frowned and glanced sideways at me, her lips moving without sound. She sent a transmission anyway, crisp and immediate, telling me that if I did not want to sell, I should simply refuse, and that she would back me if anything came of it. The Jin family had disciples of real strength in the inner sect, and even a personal disciple, she added, and they were not afraid of the Li family. At the same moment, my left hand went warm. A soft, slightly cool little hand had found its way around my fingers, trembling faintly and gripping harder than the trembling suggested, as though it were spending everything it had to communicate. One simple thing. I turned and met Lim Yong's clear, gentle eyes. She did not say a word. She just held on, with the worry sitting right there on her face for anyone to read. Something soft knocked against the inside of my chest, and I closed my palm around her cool little hand and squeezed to tell her it was all right. Then I sent Jin Namwol a transmission thanking senior sister Jin and telling her I knew what I was doing. The old me would have weighed a Golden Core clan very carefully indeed. The current me has 5 Golden Core bodyguards sitting in a system inventory, and Wang Wan's attribute panel alone flatly outclasses any Golden Core peak cultivator he is likely to meet. I ignored Li Yo's aggression entirely and spoke straight to Li Peng with an easy smile. I told Marshal Uncle Li he was joking, and that I was not short of spirit stones. Top-grade medicinal pills are things one can seek and fail to find, which in this junior's opinion makes them worth considerably more than money. Li Peng's heart sank a notch. He suppressed his cousin by transmission again, since the boy's face had already gone green, and then asked unhurriedly what I did need, since they could trade goods for goods. I let my mouth curl and answered casually, things that are rare on the open market. Other varieties of top-grade medicinal pill, special pill formulas, top-tier magic artifacts, or heaven and earth treasures on the order of the Azure Void Jade Liquid. I added that if whatever Marshal Uncle Li brought out exceeded the value of the yellow dragon pills, I was happy to make up the difference in spirit stones. Trading them for money is what makes no sense to me, because money I have, and treasures are the only thing money is for. I am so poor these days that spirit stones are all I have left, and there was still a medium-grade rebate card sitting in my inventory waiting to be applied against tonight's 100,000 transaction. Worst case, that card pays out 500,000 low-grade spirit stones, and for a mid-stage chi refining cultivator, that figure is not a number so much as a rumor. My answer went into Li Yo like a spark into a powder keg. His eyes flew wide and his voice climbed half a tone toward genuine rage. He demanded whether I expected him to trade a treasure on the level of Azure Void Jade Liquid for my yellow dragon pills, and whether I heard how ridiculous that sounded. I turned my head without hurrying, looked at him with half a smile, and asked how that differed from his plan to buy my yellow dragon pills with spirit stones. His handsome face went red and his eyes very nearly caught fire. Li Peng's hand came down on his shoulder at once, 5 fingers closing like iron pliers and pinning him where he stood. The look he turned on his cousin was cold enough to make the boy shrink his neck. Then Li Peng faced me again with his expression already back in order. He bowed properly, and his tone carried real sincerity with a threat of helplessness through it, saying the boy had been spoiled by the family, and asking me not to take it to heart. He added that a transaction is a matter of mutual consent, and that we were all members of the same sect, so nothing could be forced. If I was unwilling to trade, the matter ended there. He was not about to empty his own hoard of saved treasures to buy medicinal pills for a cousin, and I could see him deciding it. Since he had put it that plainly, I did not push, and I nodded and said that in that case I could only apologize to Marshal Uncle Li. He waved it off with a gentle smile fully intact, said the hour was late and they should head back, and bid the 3 of us farewell. Then he took his cousin by the arm and turned to go. Li Yo's steps as he was hauled away were stumbling and graceless. The whole length of the path he kept twisting his head back to gouge at me with that gloomy stare, like a bad dog whose leash has just been shortened. The 2 of them dissolved into the dark. Jin Namol knitted her brows and said with weight in her voice that she knew this Marshal Uncle Li Peng. He was a disciple under Immortal Master Du Chungso of Zhengguang Peak, and although he was not a personal disciple, his strength was reputed to be considerable. Then she paused, and open disgust crossed her face. The other one did not look like anything good, she said, and he had probably grown into that character standing in the shade of the Li family tree. Lim Yong nodded gently and said the boy's nature looked violent to her. Then she raised those large, water-clear eyes to me with the worry sitting undisguised in them. She asked whether offending Li Yo was really all right, since he was after all a son of a Golden Core clan. Something poked me softly in the chest, and I reached out and pinched her cheek, and the skin under my fingers was as tender as a freshly peeled egg, and still faintly warm. her face caught fire instantly. The blush ran from her cheeks to her earlobes and kept going down her neck, and she dropped her head so her hair slid forward and covered most of it. I told her in a relaxed voice not to worry, that it was fine. Watching me be that casual about it, and remembering the ease with which I had thrown away 100,000 earlier, the tight string in Lim Young's chest loosened a little. Junior brother Ryuk's background was probably not simple either. She decided, and she had been worrying over him too much. Jin Namwol had arrived at the same place from a different direction. Even her Jin family walked carefully around the Lee family, and I had just declined to care at all. Whatever stands behind this guy, she concluded, is probably at the nascent soul level, and she exhaled slowly and let the last of the worry go. Then she looked over at Lim Yong, who was still red and still studying her own shoes. She crossed her arms and put on a stern face, about 30% real anger and 70% teasing. She said my name flatly and accused me of flirting with her, Young right in front of her, and asked whether I was treating her as though she did not exist. Her ears went red enough to drip and her head sank lower, and she looked ready to bury her face in her own collar. I considered the accusation seriously, touched my chin, and arrived at an expression of sudden understanding. Then I told senior sister Jin that I took her point and asked how it would be if I flirted with her as well. Jin Namwol froze solid. Her expression went from staged anger to genuine astonishment, and with the night wind blowing straight at her, she discovered her face had gotten hot. She glared at me and demanded whether I was looking to die, though the delivery came out short on conviction. She warned that she would beat me up, and that a peak chi refining cultivator would have no trouble at all handling one of me. Then she raised one fair little fist and shook it in front of my nose, knuckles cracking audibly. Without waiting for a reply, she grabbed Lim Young's wrist and struck off down the road, telling Young that they were leaving and not to pay attention to this lecture. Lim Young had not recovered from the previous sentence and went along limp and stumbling behind her. I watched the two slender figures get smaller under the moon, one hauling and one being hauled, and it was comical and pleasant at the same time. Then I started walking after them, in no rush at all. The night was ink and the starlight was dust. Past the market gate, the mountain road opened out. The mountain gate of the Jumhong sword sect stood dim in the distance, and the spiritual light of the mountain protection array flowed between the peaks like silver dragons crawling slowly along the ridgelines. I stopped walking. Both of them turned to look at me. I smiled and told senior sister Lim and senior sister Jin to go back to the sect ahead of me, since I still had something to take care of. Her instincts told her that whatever I called something to take care of probably had Leo's name on it, and she did not ask. She caught Lim Yong, who had opened her mouth, and said with a crisp smile that they would go first and I should take care of myself. I told her I knew. Lim Yong let herself be pulled 2 steps, and then looked back and told junior brother Ryuk to be careful. Their outlines blurred into the layered tree shadows on the mountain road and were gone. I watched until there was nothing left to watch, then turned and went into the forest beside the road. My pulse picked up, and I did not bother hiding the anticipation. Sending the 2 of them home was never about Leo. It was about collecting 5 golden core puppets, which is not something a man does inside his own sect. The mountain protection array covers everything, layer upon layer of restrictions. 5 unfamiliar golden core spiritual pressures blooming at once inside it would bring the law enforcement haul down on me, along with elders from every peak. Outside the gate, and only outside the gate, I could bring my people out quietly. I walked a while and found a clearing well away from the road, ringed by mountains on all sides and closed in by trees. A circle of cold moonlight came down through the gap and painted the middle of it silver. I stopped, took a long breath of the cool night air, and called up the panel. Then I chose to claim the reward. The space in front of me distorted for a single instant. 5 middle-aged men with dark hair and blank faces were simply there, with no flash of spiritual chi and no spatial fissure. It was as though they had been standing in that spot the entire time and something had merely been covering my eyes. I looked them over one by one. Their faces were extremely ordinary, so ordinary that dropped into any marketplace crowd they would vanish on contact, with no feature worth describing on any of them. Their expressions were as cold as stone carvings, and their eyes were deep and hollow, like a row of dead wells. The 5 of them raised their heads to me in perfect unison, without a fraction of a beat between them, and went down on one knee together. 5 low monotone voices merged into one and called me master, and the word rang briefly through the trees and was gone. Something shifted in my sea of consciousness. It was a very strange sensation, as though 5 faint, almost imperceptible threads had sprouted out of my own awareness and tied themselves off against the 5 of them. I understood instinctively that through those threads I could direct every movement they made, and that a single thought would snuff any of them out. I took a deep breath and let the delight in my chest come all the way up. Seeing a puppet bodyguard listed on a panel and having one kneeling in the leaves in front of you are 2 entirely different experiences. I settled my face back into something calm and told them to rise. They stood at once and waited in place with their hands hanging down, not blinking, not turning their heads, not speaking. 5 human-shaped stone carvings taking up space in the clearing. I thought about it for a moment and told them that from now on they should call me young lord. Master always sounded old-fashioned to me. I am 19, and being called master by 5 middle-aged men was never going to sit right in my ears no matter how many times I heard it. They answered yes in the same single voice, without asking why and without adding a word, because an order is an order to them and reasons are not part of the arrangement. Then I told Wang 2, Wang 4, and Wang 5 to go to the Ryuk family and protect its members. As I said it, I pushed everything they needed down those threads. The geography, the faces of my relatives, the size of the household. I had brushed against the Lee family tonight, and a Golden Core clan that wanted to trace my background would have no great difficulty following the trail home. To a small family without so much as a foundation establishment cultivator in it, a Golden Core clan is not a rival but a natural disaster. Beyond that, my spending is only going to grow, and attention grows with it, and some fraction of that attention will always arrive carrying bad intentions. I have Golden Core puppets standing over me and fear nothing, but a man who guards himself and leaves his family bare is asking for the obvious to happen. Wang 2 is late-stage Golden Core, and Wang 4 and Wang 5 are mid-stage. Do not let the late-stage label fool anybody, because with a maxed Earth-rank cultivation technique and the spells to match, Wang 2 could probably suppress an ordinary Golden Core peak cultivator outright. With those 3 quartered at the Ryuk family, my household would be carrying high-end combat power on the level of a top Golden Core clan. A small family with no visible foundation establishment cultivator, hiding 3 Golden Core powerhouses in the back rooms, ought to give anyone with designs on me a memorable afternoon. The 3 of them did not pause for a heartbeat. Spiritual chi surged around them like a tide, and their robes cracked in the pressure. Then they turned into 3 brilliant rainbows, tore up through the night sky, and vanished into the depth of it. The half-transparent panel was still floating there, so I turned back to it and went through the rest of the day's haul. First, the intermediate storage ring. I put out my hand, light flared in my palm, and a silver-gray ring settled quietly into it. The band was plain and unadorned, but inside and out it was covered in dense formation patterns, complex and strange. The system described it as a special magic treasure holding an internal space 5,000 zhang in length, width and height, requiring refinement and binding before it could be used. My breath caught. 5,000 zhang on every side. I looked up at the silhouettes of the peaks standing silent under the moonlight and understood that this ring could swallow several of them whole and still have room left over. There is no lifetime in which I use all of that space. Better still, unlike a storage pouch, this thing binds. Anyone holding a storage pouch can open it and help themselves. Once a storage ring is bound, only its owner can touch what is inside, and the security is not even in the same category. I slid it onto my finger and felt the small coolness of the silver-gray band settle against my skin. Then turned it a few times and liked it more with every rotation. Then I moved to the other reward. The flowing like flying boat, listed as a top-grade flying magic treasure. A large building ship better than 100 zhang long, its skeleton laid from 10,000-year spirit wood and its plating from spirit-gathering star silver. It carries 7 stacked stories of pavilions and can accommodate hundreds of people traveling together. The living facilities are complete, an alchemy room, an artifact refining room, a spirit beast pen, and a spirit field nursery. My eyelids twitched hard. Chi refining uses magic artifacts. Foundation establishment uses spiritual artifacts, and only Golden Core can activate a magic treasure at all. A combat-type magic treasure has to be driven by the cultivator's own spiritual chi, which means that at my level I could drain myself dry and not make one twitch. Flying magic treasures are the exception. They do not run on the pilot's output, they run on spirit-gathering formations and spirit stones, and this one has 2 drive modes. In normal mode, the spirit-gathering formation inside the hull pulls in heaven and earth spiritual chi on its own and keeps the boat aloft. In full power mode, you feed it a large quantity of spirit stones and the high concentration spiritual chi inside them pushes the boat far past its ordinary speed. Best of all, enormous as the formation system on a top-grade flying magic treasure is, refining the core control formation plate is enough to command the whole thing with a thought. A mid-stage chi refining nobody flying a vessel that Golden Core powerhouses would envy. Tailor-made is not too strong a phrase. I licked my dry lips and claimed it, and the boat dropped into the system inventory. The instant it landed, the text on the panel changed again. The system announced that as a god-tier tycoon, the host had obtained their first vehicle and awarded 10,000 low-grade spirit stones and 1 low-level mercenary contract. Something new, and something called a mercenary contract, which put me straight in mind of the bodyguard puppets, and made me wonder whether this was another hiring instrument of the same species. In my old life, that phrase would have conjured up some ex-Special Forces bodyguard on a day rate. With 5 Golden Core bodyguards as my baseline, my expectations had been recalibrated somewhat, and I opened the description immediately. It read like a staffing agency's price list. Spend spirit stones to hire one temporary mercenary puppet with a choice of cultivation level. Foundation Establishment Peak runs 30,000 low-grade spirit stones a day. Golden Core Peak runs 300,000 a day. Nascent Soul Peak runs 3 million a day. The mercenary is absolutely loyal, has no autonomous consciousness, and vanishes on its own when the term expires. And only one may be hired at a time. Nascent Soul Peak. I've already seen how obscene the numbers on a system puppet get, because I have read Wang One's panel. I cannot begin to imagine what a Nascent Soul Peak version would look like. If I could put a Nascent Soul Peak puppet on the field for a single day, never mind ordinary cultivators, I could pick any top sect in Jin province and hand it losses it would be explaining for a generation. 3 million low-grade spirit stones for one day of work is money burning at a rate that does not bear looking at directly. Then again, that is an Ascent Soul Peak fighter who is absolutely loyal and cannot be bought back off me. On the day I actually need that kind of power, 3 million will not feel expensive at all. The small problem is that I do not have 3 million low-grade spirit stones sitting anywhere. I put the contract away carefully and did the arithmetic in silence. It seems I will have to save up. I let out a long breath and felt the heat in my chest go down with it, then turned my attention to the flowing light flying boat sitting in the inventory. Even through the pale blue light barrier of the storage space, its outline was perfectly clear. The whole hull was pale gold, with layer on layer of formation patterns worked into the surface, complex and obscure and shimmering faintly with a dark golden halo. At the center stood the 7-story tower with upturned eaves and finely carved window lattices. Shorter buildings flanked the tower on both sides in a staggered, well-balanced arrangement, and the whole thing read as a small floating palace. The interior was hard to make out through the inventory, so I had to build it from the description. An artifact refining room, a pill refining room, a spirit beast pen, a spiritual field nursery. Those words are not supposed to appear in the specification of a flying vessel, and reading them aloud in my own head felt indecent. I wanted badly to release it right there, jump aboard and go through it room by room. This is a magic treasure grade flying boat, and even ordinary magic artifact boats are priced to make a Foundation Establishment cultivator tighten his belt for a long stretch. Then I thought about the noise. 100 Zhang storied ship materializing out of thin air on the edge of the Jumyang mountain range would light up half the mountain like noon even at the deadest hour of night. Passing senior brothers would be the least of it, since the elders in the sect would be alarmed before the glow finished. That can wait until it is actually needed. I put the anticipation away and drew the control formation plate out of the inventory instead. It was about the size of my palm, cast from a dark golden spirit metal I did not recognize. Heavy in the hand and cool and smooth to the touch. Set dead center was a pale blue spirit crystal the size of a bean, flickering gently like a sleeping heart keeping time. I played with it for a while, then put it away in my storage pouch and ran through my calendar. The gold-white sword-marked sash needs refining, the storage ring needs refining, and the boat's control formation plate needs refining. None of the three can be skipped, and together they will eat a considerable amount of time. Every one of them is worth it, so the time is not really a cost. I shook the scheduling out of my head and went back to the panel, selected the intermediate rebate card in the inventory, and applied it against tonight's purchase of the Azure Void Jade liquid. The text churned and resolved into a line of large characters glowing gold. The designated consumption was successful, the random reward multiplier was 10, and the host was congratulated on obtaining 1 million low-grade spirit stones. My pupils blew wide. I opened my mouth and nothing came out, and for a few seconds the only sound in that forest was my own heartbeat going at my eardrums like a drum. The highest multiplier, 10 times. I bought a drop of Azure Void Jade liquid for 100,000 low-grade spirit stones, and the card handed me back 1 million for the trouble. My luck lately has crossed from fortunate into faintly suspicious. Most of my rebate draws have landed on the top multiplier and only twice stopped at 4 times, and 4 times is still the second best outcome on the wheel. I could not help grinning at the thought that the system's arrival might have quietly made me a child of destiny. I rubbed my face hard and forced the excitement back down my throat, then moved to the attribute panel and stopped on the Tycoon's confidence line. Tonight's 100,000 had lit the upgrade prompt already, so I followed the impulse and took it. Level 6 now, 32 low-grade spirit stones an hour, with the usual note that money is the foundation of becoming a god-tier tycoon. The next level costs 300,000 low-grade spirit stones in spending. 32 an hour is 11,520 a month. That is better than 130,000 a year, arriving whether I am cultivating, sleeping, or eating. Set against chi refining cultivators, that figure is not superiority, but a different species. Better yet, the next rung only asks for 300,000 in spending, and I am currently sitting on over 1 million. I have more than enough to buy myself another level, and another level doubles the monthly income again. I stared at that line for a good while with my mouth refusing to flatten out. The satisfaction coming up out of the bottom of my chest was thick and warm like a cup of scalding spiritual tea in the deep of winter. The take from one auction was frankly obscene. Over 1 million in spirit stones alone, plus the azure void jade liquid, the top-grade yellow dragon pills, and the gold-white sword-marked sash. Then the intermediate storage ring, the flowing light flying boat, the golden core puppet bodyguard squad, and a contract that can summon Nascent Soul Peak combat power on demand. In one day, my family fortune moved from the tens of thousands of spirit stones to the millions. From here on, I do not miss an annual auction. Conveniently, I now have Marshall Ant U's sound transmission mark, which means an insider who can tell me what is coming under the hammer in time to plan around it. That thought carried me over to the beauty module on the panel. It used to hold 2 names. Now there was a third line under them. Yu Yoyan, favorability 10. Next to what Jin Namwol and Lim Young are carrying, 10 points is a pitiful little number, and the minimum unlock line sits at 60, which is a long walk from here. She is a Foundation Establishment inner sect disciple, and I am a chi refining nobody who has only just been let into the outer sect. Our circles are separated by several floors of the same building, so we will not be bumping into each other by accident. Fortunately, I have senior sister Lim and senior sister Jin. Lim Young's favorability is about to touch 100, and at 100 I unlock the beauty cultivation function and collect an additional reward on top of it. Jin Namwol has a reward waiting for me at 80. Those two are where the effort goes for now. I cleared my head and claimed the reward for adding Yu Yoyan's contact details, and the panel flashed. The system confirmed the addition and paid out 10,000 low-grade spirit stones along with a luck trait called Breath of Kyung Metal. It carries a trace of the sharp chi of the Metal Dao between breaths, raising Metal Dao spell power by 30%, and giving spells a certain chance to deal double damage. My eyes widened and my breathing stalled. A medium-grade trait. The one Jin Namwol's line handed me was low-grade, and Sword Skill Apprentice is useful but limited, whereas this is a solid step up the ladder. 30% on Metal Dao spell power plus a chance at double damage, which is a critical hit by any other name, is not an improvement so much as a different weight class. The higher the cultivation of the beauty whose details I collect, the more generous the opening reward. Lim Young and Jin Namwol are both chi refining, and their rewards, while different, sat on roughly the same shelf. Yu Yoyan is Foundation Establishment, and the Spirit Stones alone came to 10,000 with a medium-grade luck trait stacked on top, which is plainly a tier above. Perhaps my own realm factors into it, since my cultivation sits a full major realm below hers. Either way, with Breath of Kyung Metal in hand, my road of running the Metal Dao and the Sword Dao together just got a great deal steadier. Then I lifted my eyes off the panel and looked slowly around the clearing, silver gray with moonlight from edge to edge. I had no idea how long I had been standing there, but the crescent had climbed to the top of the sky and lit the whole clearing up like daylight. From somewhere down the valley came the long, lonely calls of night owls. Wang 1 and Wang 3 were still standing exactly where they had been, postures unchanged, breathing so light it was practically theoretical. 2 sculptures made of flesh and blood waiting for the next instruction. I stayed quiet for a few breaths, then told the 2 of them to remain near the marketplace from now on. They were to cause no commotion, keep their heads down, and come to guard me whenever I left the sect. They answered yes in unison and added nothing. Looking at their numb, resolute faces, something else occurred to me. I thought it over and told them also to keep an eye on Li Yo, and to notify me the moment he left the territory of the Gomyang mountain range. If Li Yo is merely arrogant and overbearing, he can jump around inside the Jeomhong sword sect as much as he likes, and I will not waste a breath on him. If he decides to get creative, that is a different conversation. Inside the sect, my hands are tied, because no matter how worthless he is, he remains a sect disciple. Killing a sect disciple on sect ground gets investigated to the bottom by the law enforcement hall, and a golden core cultivator doing it would make more noise than I want. Outside the Jeomhong mountain range, none of that is the sect's business. If he has the sense to leave me alone, I have no interest in going looking for him. It depends entirely on how badly he wants to find out. The moonlight came down on my face and drew the small, cold smile at the corner of my mouth in perfect detail. On the bluestone path that runs between the entry-level disciple peaks, the moon came down like poured water and left the stone a cold frost white. The night wind worked through the dense forest on either side and kept the branches whispering, as though a great many invisible things were holding a conversation in the dark. Li Yo walked in front with his face livid and his steps heavy, and every boot heel struck the slabs with a venting force that sent dull echoes down the empty road. Li Peng followed 3 paces back, neither fast nor slow, his expression as flat as standing water and nothing showing in it except an occasional flicker deep in his brown eyes. Then Li Yo stopped short, swung his right hand, and drove his fist into a low branch of an old crooked tree. Spiritual chi went through the strike, along with plain brute strength, and the arm-thick limbs snapped, throwing wood chips and torn leaves in every direction. The crown above him shook hard and dumped dew and dead leaves down on both of them, soaking half their robes, and he did not appear to notice any of it. His face twisted and his chest heaved, and he swore that the guy surnamed Ryuk went too far. He demanded whether his cousin had seen those eyes because the man had not taken the Lee family seriously in the slightest. In his entire life, nobody had ever treated him that way. Even after entering the Jeumhong sword sect, which of the disciples on the entry-level peaks had failed to become polite the moment they heard the words Golden Core Clan. Tonight that look had come at him the way a man looks at a weed growing beside a road. Not disgust, not hostility, not even contempt. It was a disregard that came up out of the bone, as though in Ryuk Young's world, Lee Yo did not rise to the level of a thing worth attending to. That is 100 times worse than being insulted to your face. Lee Peng said nothing at all. He stood where he was and let the boy curse himself out, and only when the breathing had gone from heavy to merely fast did he open his mouth. He said he had told his cousin long ago that the Geumhung sword sect was full of hidden talent, and was not a place where one did as one pleased. Leo's head snapped around. The expression on his cousin's face was calm and gentle, an elder patiently instructing an ignorant child, and privately he found it nauseating. He thought the man was a hypocrite of the first order. Back at the auction house door, his own cousin had not lifted a finger to save a fellow direct descendant's face. The man had apologized to Ryuk Yang on his behalf, then hauled him off by the arm, hard enough that the shoulder still ached. He pushed the irritation down and produced an impatient smile instead. A powerhouse, or a clan surnamed Ryuk, was not something he had ever heard of, he remarked. So this Ryuk Yang's background was probably nothing special. Lee Peng's brows came down at that. First, he said, does a chi refining cultivator of average background spend 125,000 low-grade spirit stones at an auction without so much as blinking? Top-tier medicinal pills and heaven and earth treasures, and not one flicker. And did his cousin honestly believe that himself? Lee Yo frowned and made a sound in his throat. Second, Lee Peng went on, raising a finger. When the girl from the Jin family introduced the Lee family as a Golden Core clan, had he watched Ryuk Yang's face? It had not moved from beginning to end, which meant the man genuinely did not care, which in turn meant a Golden Core clan posed no threat to him. Behind him, there had to be something at least the equal of the Lee family. Lee Peng gave him no opening to interrupt and went straight on to the third point. It was true that there was no major family and no Golden Core cultivator surnamed Ryuk anywhere under the Jeumhong sword sect. But how did his cousin know Ryuk Yang's background lay under the Jeumhong sword sect at all, since there is no shortage of precedent for cultivators from other top powers coming here to study? And even granting that he was not from Jin province, the eastern region is vast, and there is hardly a corner of it without one or two reclusive great powers tucked away. Having laid out all three, he looked straight into his cousin's eyes, with a weight behind the look that was not advice. He told him not to entertain ideas he had no business entertaining. For the last time, he said, this was the Jeumhong sword sect, and not the Lee family, and everything here was done according to sect rules. Leo's face went from green to white. After a long moment, he forced out a stiff, cold smile and said he had never claimed he would not follow sect rules, and that his cousin was overthinking. Then he exhaled slightly and nodded and said that as long as the boy knew, it was fine. What he feared most was his cousin leaning on the Lee family name to lean on fellow disciples inside the sect. Playing that game on sect ground would finish the boy and could drag the whole family in behind him. Leo said nothing more, remarking coolly that he was heading back and that his cousin should rest early too. Then he turned onto the fork road toward the entry-level disciple residences, which was narrower than the main path and hemmed in more tightly by trees. His footsteps thinned out and were finally swallowed by the low sawing of night insects. Once his cousin's gaze had fully left his back, Leo let his pace slacken. The calm on his face cracked like glazed porcelain and peeled away in pieces, and what was underneath was not pleasant. He decided his cousin was overthinking after all. What if Ryuk Yang was bluffing the whole way? What if he was nothing more than a lucky little cultivator who had stumbled into some opportunity and come away with a large pile of spirit stones? That possibility was hardly impossible, and how else does a mid-stage chi-refining disciple come by that kind of confidence? Until he knew exactly what stood behind that man, he was not letting go of it. His cousin clearly could not be relied on. He would find someone to look into it himself. He wanted to see whether the fellow surnamed Ryuk really had a backer worth all this caution. Wang-On and Wang-3 escorted me all the way to the mountain gate of the Jeumhong sword sect. The stone auspicious beasts flanking the gate had cold, rigid lines picked out by the moon. I walked through without looking back, and the two figures behind me folded into the night like a pair of water drops going into a deep pool. There is still a serious climb from the gate to my residence on Hyeongyum Peak's companion peak. I took the stone steps one at a time at a steady pace. By the end of that walk, the elation I had carried all night had settled the way boiling water settles when you take it off the fire. Back at my residence, I shut the door behind me, The room was very quiet, and the moon came through the window paper and turned everything a hazy silver gray. I went straight into the cultivation room, sat down cross-legged on the cushion, and took the wooden bottle of Azure Void Jade liquid out of my storage pouch. Waiting was never an option with something like this, and one more day of it sitting in my pouch would have been unbearable. I flicked the stopper out with my thumb. A spiritual chi thick enough to nearly condense into something you could hold came pouring out of the bottle mouth immediately. Flowers and grass, the clean cold of a mountain spring, the mellow thickness of thousand-year spirit wood. Wrapped somewhere down under all of it was a cool aura I have no word for, a chill that goes straight into the marrow. I did not hesitate. I tipped my head back and drank it, and the liquid crossing my tongue was unexpectedly cool, like a snowflake landing and melting there. Going down my throat, it drew an icy line I could follow, past my throat, along my esophagus into my abdomen. Then the spiritual chi detonated and spread out along my meridians into my limbs and bones. That cool aura moved like a wisp of temperatureless smoke through the meridians and into the sea of consciousness behind my brow. I closed my eyes and quietly circulated my cultivation technique. My divine sense had always been a chaotic thing pinned inside my physical body, a handful of water stifled in a sealed jar. The cool aura was the spring rain poured over that jar. Under it, my divine sense expanded and swelled, and reached at a rate I could actually perceive, like a seed sprouting in silence, roots pushing outward inch by inch. I have no idea how long that went on. Then the expansion touched some boundary I could not see, and in my sea of consciousness something broke open like spring thunder, a roar out of the depth of my own soul, vast and clean. Golden light lit up behind my eyes and came in like a tide until the whole of my consciousness space was bright as noon. I felt a shackle come off me. My divine sense broke through the limits of my physical body and spread out into the room, and the sensation was strange enough to be frightening. Since the day I began to cultivate, I have only ever perceived my own body and the spiritual chi moving in it. Now with my eyes shut, I could see everything around me, every grain of dust hanging in the air within several zhang, every fiber in the window paper, every insect crossing the yard outside. All of it arrived in my perception in full detail. It was more precise and more solid than sight, because nothing was being reflected off anything. It was simply present in my consciousness with no distance and no gap in between. This is divine sense, the privilege of a foundation establishment cultivator, and I have it at mid-stage chi refining. I opened my eyes slowly, and my pupils looked a shade darker and deeper to me than they had the day before. My mouth curved on its own. As my cultivation climbs from here, the range of that perception climbs with it. When cultivators of my own level come to measure their divine sense against mine, they will not be standing on the same line to begin with. I let out a breath, pushed the excitement down, and got to my feet. The sky outside the window had gone quietly pale. The first of the morning light was just clearing the eastern ridge, coming through the cloud-carved window paper and laying several pale gold columns across the floor. I took out my sect token, tapped a fingertip against it, fed in a thread of spiritual chi, and sent a message to Jin Nam Wol's sound transmission mark. I asked senior sister Jin whether she was free because I had something I wanted her help with. The token warmed, and a few breaths later her crisp answer came back saying she was free, and telling me to go ahead and say it. I smiled and sent the rest. I wanted to exchange spirit stones for contribution points, and then borrow her authority to purchase some cultivation techniques, spells, and top-tier magic artifacts. I am carrying over 1 million spirit stones, but inside the sect's contribution point system, the better the goods, the higher the authority required to touch them. A newly registered outer sect disciple has none at all. Jin Namwol is different, because sitting in the top 10 of the outer sect gives her a clearance far above mine. Profound rank top-tier cultivation techniques and spells. First-tier top-grade medicinal pills and magic treasures. All of it becomes reachable if she does the handing over. Her reply came back with a snag in it. The cultivation techniques and spells would not work, because exchanging for those requires a heavenly Tao oath, and they can only be used by the person who swore it and cannot be gifted. Medicinal pills, talismans, and magic treasures, however, can be gifted freely. I had meant to solve the technique problem in the same trip, and that road was closed for now, though being able to move pills, talismans, and treasures was hardly a loss. I sent back that this was fine, and asked her to handle those 3 categories. Her next message carried a note of hesitation, asking whether I was sure, since exchanging spirit stones for contribution points runs at a triple price difference, and is simply too expensive. My smile widened, and I told her it was fine, that I had plenty of spirit stones. In a cultivation room in the outer sect quarter, Jin Namwol sat cross-legged on her cushion. Reading that last line, the corner of her mouth twitched hard. She was certain this guy was showing off at her. The infuriating part was that it was a show-off she had no ground to argue with. She had watched him drop 125,000 low-grade spirit stones at the auction the previous evening without a flicker. She took a breath, tapped her fingertip down on the token, and said fine, that they would meet at the outer sect plaza and go to the affairs hall together. Then she stood up in one motion, pulled her outer robe off the wall, threw it on, and walked out. The morning breeze came out of the forest carrying pine and swept the whole of the outer sect plaza. It was barely dawn and there were already outer sect disciples crossing back and forth. A few were drilling spells in the trial sword area at the edge, their sword light flickering in the mist. Others hurried into the stone paths that lead off toward the various peaks, their sleeves whipping around corners and gone. Overhead, inner sect disciples went past on flying swords now and then, trailing ribbons of spiritual light and crossing the whole plaza in a few breaths before vanishing over the ridgeline. I stood at the edge of it, looking at some wildflowers swaying in the breeze a little way off. Disciples going past kept looking over almost without meaning to. The female cultivators slowed down when their eyes reached my profile, and the male cultivators sped up and got out of the area, radiating sour envy the whole way. Jin Namwol, stepping into the plaza, located me almost instantly. There was not much choice about it, since standing in that crowd I apparently came out of a different drawing than everybody else in it. She took in the high bridge of the nose, the thin, lightly pressed lips, the deep eyes currently doing nothing more strenuous than staring at wildflowers. Her own eyes flickered, and her heart skipped for no reason she was willing to accept. How did this kid get better looking every single day? She dropped her head, breathed deep, forced the whole business back down, and came over quickly. When she reached me, she flashed a crisp smile and waved and said my name. I turned at the sound, pulled my eyes off the flowers, and gave her a clean, gentle smile that opened up in the morning light. Her heart jumped a second time without permission. She greeted me and I told her she had made it, and she coughed dryly and asked, in a voice she was working to keep ordinary, whether I had been waiting long. I said no, that I had only just arrived. Jin Namwol discovered that holding a calm expression under that gaze was considerably harder than she had assumed. Her mouth had gone stiff, her ears had gone warm, and she had no idea what to do with her hands. She looked away, waved decisively, and said we should go straight to the affairs hall. She turned and set off ahead of me with long, fast strides, like a woman leaving a burning building. I followed about 2 steps behind at my own pace. We climbed the mountain road step by step between old pines of no determinable age, their needles making a fine dry sound in the breeze, the air full of pine resin and dew-soaked earth. After a while, she had digested whatever that awkwardness had been and turned her head to ask casually how many contribution points I planned to exchange for. I thought about it and told her I was not sure yet, and that we could start with 300,000. Tycoon's confidence needs another 200,000 and change in spending before it levels again. I would put 300,000 in, take the level, and then look at what the next rung asked for. My original plan had been to convert the whole million and more into contribution points, and the mercenary contract changed my mind about that yesterday. 3 million hires an Ascent Soul Peak puppet for a day, and that pile is better left sitting where I can reach it. Jin Namwol's feet stopped moving. She stood there, turned her head, and asked how much, with her eyes wide open. I stopped too and told her 300,000, with a little smile in it, and asked what was wrong. The corner of her eye twitched hard, and a slow procession of confusion crossed her face while she repeated the number back at me as though it might sound different the second time. Worse, from the way I said it, 300,000 low-grade spirit stones did not appear to be a large amount to me at all. Exactly how much money does this kid have? She is a direct descendant of the Jin family, and sits in the top 10 of the outer sect, which makes her wealthy by the standards of anybody her age. Even she could not produce 300,000 low-grade spirit stones on demand. Her chest rose and fell with the effort of processing it. Her figure has never been in question, and the heaving made the curves in front rather obvious. My eyes drifted with emotion for less than a breath before I hauled them back to the mountain road ahead. Getting caught would have been unbearably embarrassing. She did not seem to notice, since she was busy recovering, and she asked again whether I was sure about 300,000. I nodded and said the rate was 30 to 1 anyway, so I was just making it a round number. Apparently my definition of a round number was operating on a different scale from hers. She complained about it at length inside her own head, and said none of it out loud, because the man has money and there is no stopping him. She took a breath and put the conversation back on the rails. Since she would be the one exchanging, she said the spirit stones would have to go into her sect token, and she asked whether that was acceptable. I smiled and said of course, that I trusted senior sister Jin. She muttered that she did not trust herself as much as I trusted her. 300,000 low-grade spirit stones is the kind of sum most Foundation establishment cultivators would fight to the death over, and I had handed it across without blinking. Then she paused and asked what I planned to exchange for. I had a general direction already, so I said top-tier magic artifacts and top-grade medicinal pills. She nodded and said we would go and look, that it was my call what to buy, and that she was only there to run errands. Talking as we went, the Affairs Hall pavilion came around a bend in the road before long. This building was a size larger than the one where I registered. 3 floors of dark blue stone with light golden formation patterns set into the window frames. We pushed through the half-closed copper-skinned door. The hall was far more spacious than the outside suggested, with a giant 9-layered spirit lamp hanging from the dome, throwing an even white light over everything like daylight. Dozens of counter windows were set into the walls all around, with a queue in front of every one of them. Several rows of stone benches ran down the middle for waiting, a few disciples sitting scattered along them with their heads buried in jade slips. We queued a while before a window near the corner opened up. Behind the counter sat an outer sect deacon, a young man who looked to be somewhere in his 20s. His professional smile lasted precisely as long as it took him to check the sect token Jin Namwol handed over. His back straightened without his input and the smile converted itself into sincere respect. He bowed slightly, greeted senior sister Jin warmly, and asked whether she was here for spirit stones or contribution points. Her expression stayed calm with the composure of somebody who has been treated that way often enough to find it unremarkable, and she said contribution points. His smile went brighter still, and he asked eagerly how much she was exchanging. She did not answer and turned to look at me. I said 300,000 spirit stones in the tone of a man ordering lunch. Silence dropped on both sides of the window. The deacon's expression froze on his face. Several breaths later he came back to himself, swallowed with his throat working visibly, and asked very carefully whether that had been 300,000 low-grade spirit stones. Jin Namwol nodded calmly and told him it had. His voice picked up a tremor as he asked us to hand over the spirit stones, and his fingers moved fast across the operating formation array under the counter. A dark compartment beneath it hummed faintly, and an opening about the size of a wash basin slid open to reveal an identification formation array with light moving inside it. Jin Namwol tilted her head and nudged her chin at the opening and told me to pour them in. I reached into the mouth of the storage pouch at my waist, moved my divine sense, and the spirit stones came out of it like a floodgate letting go. The crisp knocking of stone against stone merged into one dense continuous clatter, while the identification array worked and its spiritual light flickered on and off. The sound went on too long. It went on long enough that the cultivators queuing around us began turning their heads. What they saw was a waterfall running upside down, countless low-grade spirit stones pouring out of a pouch mouth in a stream that brightened the whole corner of the hall. The room quieted down until the only thing left in it was that clattering bouncing between the walls. Outer sect disciples exchanging for contribution points is not in itself rare, since the sect is full of wealthy families' children. Nobody there had ever seen it done by pouring. The same question was going through every head in the queue as the stream refused to stop. 100,000, then 150, then 200, and still it did not stop. Exactly how much was this guy tipping out? My attention was not on any of it, because my divine sense was already outside my body measuring the flow precisely. The instant 300,000 had gone through, I stopped my hand and said that was enough. I flipped my wrist and put the pouch away. Jin Namwol had caught the faint fluctuation when I released my divine sense, and her eyes widened a little. She asked, with surprise in it, whether I had already used the Azure Void Jade liquid, and whether my divine sense had awakened. I nodded with a small smile and told her I had used it last night. Her eyes turned frankly envious. She clicked her tongue and said, half emotional and half jealous, that it really is good to be rich, and that she would like to awaken her own divine sense early too. She is at peak chi refining and has not managed it, because heaven and earth treasures that pull divine sense forward are simply too rare. Even meeting one at an auction only matters if you have the money to take it home. While we were talking at the counter, the deacon had hurried the paperwork through. He handed Jin Namwol's sect token back with both hands and a respect that had climbed another notch, not quite daring to lift his eyes. It was all set, he reported. 10,000 contribution points in total, and he asked her to check. Then he stole another glance at me with a fresh layer of awe on it. He had sat at that counter for more than 20 years and seen every kind of person who walks through the door. Never once had he seen an outer sect disciple produce 300,000 low-grade spirit stones in a single sitting. This senior brother, he concluded, must have a terrifying background. I was not paying attention to the deacon's face. I was watching the tycoon's confidence line, which had lit up with its upgrade halo exactly as expected, and my mouth curled into a calm little smile as I took the level. Level 7, 64 low-grade spirit stones an hour, with the same patient note that money is the basis of a god-tier tycoon, and a new upgrade price of 2 million low-grade spirit stones. 64 an hour is better than 23,000 a month, and across a year it comes to more than 270,000. For a Foundation establishment cultivator, that is a figure you dream about rather than budget with. The threshold, though, has started to get genuinely frightening. 2 million in spending for the next rung, and I am sitting on 700,000 after today. On passive income alone, I would be saving for years without spending a single stone. Get my hands on a few more rebate cards and the arithmetic changes entirely. I ran the numbers silently, put the panel away, looked up at Jin Namwol waiting beside me, and told her we should go. She pocketed her sect token and nodded. The hall was still abnormally quiet. The cultivators around us had not finished recovering from the waterfall. Their eyes came after the two of us, carrying shock and awe and jealousy in roughly equal measure. The female cultivators looked at my face, then looked at Jin Namwol in a way that was not friendly at all. I was oblivious to every bit of it. We walked out through the crowd side by side and pushed the door open, and the air outside was much cooler than the hall. She turned her head and asked what we should exchange for first. I thought about it and answered quickly, saying we should go and get a magic treasure first. I am still at mid-stage chi refining, and even if my spiritual root quality breaks through to peak grade later, it will take years to reach foundation establishment. Top-tier magic artifacts are necessary equipment for that whole stretch, and there is a sect assessment next year that I would like to do well in. Jin Namwol nodded as though that were obvious and tilted her chin off into the distance, saying magic treasure exchanges happen at Artifact Peak, and that we could go straight there. Under her guidance, we crossed several mountain paths and came out at the foot of a shorter companion peak on the outskirts of it. This companion peak is nothing like the ones where outer sect disciples live. There are almost no residences on the slope, only a single building the size of a palace standing on a platform, cut into the mountain. The Artifact Hall, 7 or 8 stories of dark red volcanic rock with its outer walls tempered by special formations, giving back a cold metallic gleam in the sunlight. Flanking the main entrance stood 2 copper pillars as thick as 3 men with their arms around them. The shafts were crowded with magic artifact patterns, swords and bells and flying boats, and formation diagrams packed on until the eye gives up. Jin Namwol went in first and I followed. A complicated smell met us at the door. Spirit iron and spirit wood and quenching oil and a dozen artifact refining materials I could not name. It is not a pleasant smell, and it is not offensive either. There were more people in here than in the exchange hall, disciples weaving between the counter windows on every side. The counters ran in more than 100 rows, with an outer sect deacon in deacon's robes behind each one. She scanned the room, found an open spot, and walked over fast. The deacon behind that counter was a pretty female cultivator. Her eyes went to Jin Namwol's face first, and just as the professional smile was assembling itself, her peripheral vision drifted sideways to me and the whole expression stalled. That senior brother was standing in the light, handsome and refined enough to look as though somebody had carved him stroke by stroke with a sword. His bearing was so detached it seemed to belong somewhere else. For a female cultivator, she decided that face had too much lethality in it. She pinched her own thigh hard and only then managed to pull her eyes off me. She got an enthusiastic smile out with some effort and asked senior sister what magic treasure she would like to exchange for. Jin Namwol handed over her sect token casually, turned her head to me and asked what I thought we should get. The deacon's hand paused on the token, so this senior sister was not buying for herself but for the senior brother beside her. A picture assembled itself in the deacon's head without being invited. A wealthy and generous senior sister, sparing no expense on magic treasures, in order to pursue a junior brother who looked like something out of a painting, with the attentiveness on open display. Envy went through her immediately. She did not envy me for being given a magic treasure. She envied the senior sister for being rich enough to spoil an impossibly handsome senior brother on that scale, and she thought that with that many spirit stones she would be handing out gifts too. Then her hand finished flipping the token over. The special mark of the top 10 of the outer sect came into view, and the whole little romance she had been building collapsed in one beat. Top 10 of the outer sect. Someone carrying that mark would certainly reach the inner sect in time, and becoming a sect elder was not impossible either. That is simply not a thing a small outer sect deacon gets to fantasize about. She straightened her posture in a hurry and spoke with real respect in her voice now. Senior Sister Jin's exchange authority was at the highest level of the outer sect, and she could purchase magic artifacts of any quality. I asked her directly to show me the top-tier magic artifacts, and specifically whether she had anything in the heavy sword category. She asked us to wait a moment and said she would check right away, then pulled a palm-sized jade slip from under the counter and pressed it onto the formation plate. A moment later, she looked up and reported that the treasury currently held 2 heavy swords at top-tier magic artifact quality. One is called the Gold Essence Heavy Sword and concentrates on raising the power of Metal Dao spells and Gold Essence sword techniques. The other is called the Black Obsidian Sword and raises the power of Metal Dao and Sword Dao spells at the same time. And both are made from first-class materials, exceptionally sharp and extremely heavy. I listened and made the decision almost without thinking, telling her I wanted the Black Obsidian Sword. The heavy sword technique is already a hybrid of the Metal Dao and the Sword Dao, so a blade that lifts both halves at once is built for me down to the grain. The Gold Essence Heavy Sword is useless in my hands, since I have never learned the Gold Essence Sword technique, and no amount of boost applies to a technique I do not know. The deacon nodded respectfully and said the price of that sword was 4,100 contribution points. Then, while she recorded it, she could not stop herself sneaking another look at Jin Namwol. Inwardly, she was doing arithmetic and hating it. 4,100 contribution points, which converts to over 40,000 low-grade spirit stones going the easy direction, and better than 120,000 going the other way. She had stopped envying senior sister Jin. She now envied the senior brother, since senior sister Jin had put 4,100 contribution points on the counter for him without one blink. The sheer scale of that generosity made her chest ache on the woman's behalf. If only somebody were willing to do that for her, she thought, and kept the thought strictly where it was. She collected herself, said she had recorded it, and asked whether the senior brother needed anything else besides the black obsidian sword. I nodded and asked whether there were any top-tier magical robes. She said yes at once, that the sect had received 3 of them 2 days ago, newly refined by the senior brothers and senior sisters of the inner sect. They were cut in the same style as the outer sect disciple uniform, but built from entirely different materials with far stronger functions. I asked what the difference between them was. She flipped through the jade slip and answered quickly. One of them raises the spiritual chi operation efficiency of metal Dao cultivation techniques and cuts consumption in battle, while the other 2 condense a layer of spiritual chi shield around the body. Of the 2 shield robes, one is of especially excellent quality, and the shield it condenses can just barely take a single blow from an early-stage foundation establishment cultivator. I did not think about it and asked how many contribution points the best shield robe cost. The deacon took a deep breath and let her eyes drift quietly toward Jin Namwol again. Jin Namwol stood there expressionless, saying nothing and offering no opinion whatsoever, which in the deacon's reading amounted to a clear statement that if he wants it, buy it. Then she cleared her throat and explained seriously that this robe counted as a top-tier choice even among top-tier magical robes. The price, therefore, ran a cut above ordinary top-tier magic artifacts, at 5,500 contribution points. My eyebrows went up. 5,500, which is more than the black obsidian sword. And the black obsidian sword is a weapon, and weapon-type treasures are inherently the expensive category. Put the 2 together and the 10,000 contribution points I had just acquired were gone in one sitting, 9,600 of them, leaving a grand total of 400 behind. I did not hesitate and told her to buy it. The deacon's breath hissed in privately. Seeing that Jin Namwol still had no intention of objecting, she swallowed, recorded the transaction on the jade slip, and asked whether this senior brother needed anything further. I thought about it. Those 2 top-tier magic artifacts plus the gold-white sword-marked sash gives me 3 of them on my person, which is a luxurious loadout by outer sect standards, and is quite enough for now. When I have more spirit stones, I will look at restocking. I told her that would be all. She nodded and lowered her head to record it. Jin Namwol, who had not said much of anything from beginning to end, let the corner of her mouth twitch once when I nodded on that last robe. Then she ran a quiet tally on my behalf. 300,000 spirit stones in, 10,000 contribution points out, and inside a quarter of an hour 9,600 of them spent. The way this guy spends money, she thought, makes him look like a golden core immortal master. When the deacon had finished recording, she said respectfully that we should wait a moment, because a top-tier magic artifact transaction meant retrieving the items from the warehouse herself. Jin Namwol nodded calmly and told her to go ahead. She bowed quickly and hurried off into the depth of the corridor behind the artifact hall. When she came back, she brushed a fingertip against the storage pouch at her waist, and 2 pieces of magic treasure appeared on the counter out of thin air with their radiance held in. One was a heavy sword, black as poured ink and longer than a tall man, with a thick spine and a keen edge and an extremely steady weight of oppression coming off it. The other was a robe folded into sharp edges without a single wrinkle in it. At a glance, it looked almost identical to standard outer sect disciple attire, and a second look showed the difference clearly enough. The spiritual patterns worked into it were intricate and interlocked, far finer and more complex than the ones on a normal uniform, with faint spiritual light moving slowly through the lines. I took a deep breath, put the excitement away, and stored both pieces carefully. The deacon had already deducted the contribution points from the token. She held it in both hands, bowed, and returned it to Jin Namwol, reporting that the 2 top-tier magic artifacts had come to 9,600 contribution points in total. Jin Namwol took the token back casually, as relaxed as a woman who has just bought a few cheap trinkets, with no trace of heartache anywhere on her. 2 top-tier magic artifacts, 9,600 contribution points, close to 100,000 low-grade spirit stones by the honest conversion. She stole a glance at me and a wave of envy went through her again. This senior brother is certainly handsome and exceptionally striking, she thought. But is his skin not a little on the thick side? Magic artifacts of that value, accepted without one word of refusal. Living off a woman's purse with that much righteous confidence really is a skill. We walked out of the artifact hall side by side with the sunlight coming down warm on us. Jin Namwol turned her head and asked what I planned to do with the 400 contribution points left over. I thought about it and said we should go exchange for some medicinal pills. Her mouth curled into a knowing smile and her eyes picked up a teasing glint. She pointed out that Young thinks day and night about doing alchemy for me, and here I was buying pills refined by strangers. If Young found out, she would feel guilty for weeks. The image came up immediately. Lim Young's face at the auction when I'd bid on those yellow dragon pills, full of guilt and working hard not to show any of it. Something warmed in my chest and the corner of my mouth softened without permission. Should I be making more chances to spend time with senior sister Lim so her favorability reaches 100 sooner? I looked at Jin Namwol with a calm smile and asked her not to tell senior sister Lim, suggesting we keep it a small secret between the two of us. Her heart skipped without warning, and she did not even work out what the skip was about. She repeated the phrase back, a secret between us. I nodded as though it were obvious and said that since the two of them were so close, she surely would not want to see senior sister Lim upset. Jin Namwol beamed, bright and generous, and said fine then, that she would keep her mouth shut, and told me to come on. We went to Dan Peak afterward and exchanged for medicinal pills at the Alchemy Hall on its companion peak. Demand there must run permanently ahead of supply, because they had no top-grade yellow dragon pills in stock at all, only top-grade chi nourishing pills. A bottle of those runs 150 contribution points, which converts to roughly 1,500 low-grade spirit stones, a little under the going rate for yellow dragon pills. I took 2 bottles without deliberating. That left 100 contribution points on the token, and I intended to hand them to Jin Namwol as thanks for spending her whole day running around the sect on my behalf. She refused, and then got genuinely annoyed about it. She knitted her brows and demanded what I took her for, paying her off over a matter the size of a sesame seed. Was our friendship not worth 100 contribution points? Put like that, there was nothing for me to do but let it go. What came next left me somewhere between laughing and despairing. She refused every point, then reached into her own token, added the last few dozen she had, and bought me a 3rd bottle. That is how I ended up walking out of Dan Peak with 3 bottles. Neither of us wanted to linger there. The Alchemy Hall sits on a different companion peak from the residences, but if we walked straight into Lim Young, she would blame herself all over again. Running the length of the sect exchanging magic treasures and medicinal pills had taken us nearly to noon. I looked at the sky, turned to her, and offered to buy her a meal, just a meal between friends. This time she did not refuse at all. Her lips curved and she nodded generously and said all right. We ordered 5 dishes of spiritual food in the sect cafeteria, everyone faintly suffused with spiritual chi and excellent to look at and to eat. We ate well, came away satisfied, and went back to our own residences. What mildly surprised me was the panel afterward. I had given Jin Namwol nothing today, no magic treasure, no medicinal pill, and we had done nothing but run errands together and share lunch. Her favorability toward me had quietly climbed 2 points to 77. Looking at that number left me faintly confused and smiling at it anyway. I did not understand the mechanism and I was not about to complain about it either, since 3 more points puts her at 80 and another favorability reward drops into my hands. Time slipped past. More than a month went by before I looked up from it. This morning I opened my eyes and ended a full night of cultivation, with the light coming through the window paper and laying mottled shapes across the floor. I got up briskly, worked through my daily tasks one at a time, then pulled up the panel and poured all 50 points of general experience into my spiritual root. The system read the root back to me as high grade still, 3,250 points banked out of the 10,000 it wants. Watching that bar advance steadily toward a third of the scale, I could not keep my mouth flat, and the joy in it was entirely genuine. It will not be long now before the spiritual root promotes from high grade to peak grade. Over that month, I completed the daily tasks religiously, every single day without missing one, and my basic attributes climbed with them. Physique has crossed the 10-point mark, and intelligence and charm are both approaching it. The changes are not confined to a number anywhere, since my body has gone visibly lean and hard, probably a match for a body cultivator at late stage or even peak chi refining. My comprehension ability runs clearer and sharper than it used to, so the wind control spell and the golden light shield I exchanged for a few days ago are progressing fast. Even my temperament has shifted with the rest of it, gone quieter and more ethereal, closer to the way people here imagine an immortal ought to carry himself. Only my appearance has stopped changing, presumably because there is nowhere left for it to go. Alongside the daily tasks, I spent every day feeding my own chi into the top-tier magic artifacts, the control formation plate of the flowing light flying boat, and the storage ring. Day after day of nourishing and refining finished the last of them 10 days ago. From that point, I began taking top-grade yellow dragon pills to assist cultivation, and the effect of those pills is no exaggeration at all. Combined with the spiritual chi and the spiritual food I eat at every meal, my cultivation speed is several times what it was. 1 yellow dragon pill a day for 10 days, and my mid-stage chi refining realm has gone completely stable, with the foundation solid under it and the late-stage chi refining bottleneck coming steadily closer. I flipped my hand, put the wind control spell manual away into the storage ring, stood, and stretched until my bones popped from shoulder to spine. Walking to the window, I pushed the lattice open, and a cool morning wind came in at me carrying green sap and the faintly sweet damp of turned soil. I looked up in time to catch an intersect disciple crossing the sky on a flying sword, robes streaming, cutting the morning open like a line of light before vanishing into cloud. The new year is nearly here, and today I leave the sect and go home to the Ryuk family. I am not the man who left that house. I am an outer sect disciple of the Gaemhong sword sect. I carry 3 top-tier magic artifacts on my person, and the spirit stones in my storage space come to nearly 1 million. Getting rich and never going home is like wearing fine silk in the dark. I am going back in style, seeing everybody, and putting my family on its feet properly. Out of the cultivation room, I went to the cafeteria first and ordered 3 spiritual dishes for a simple breakfast. Simple for me. For any other outer sect disciple, that is an indefensible extravagance. Over the past month, I have acquired a reputation around the companion peaks of Hyunmin Peak. A man who eats spiritual food at every meal and looks the way I do cannot keep a low profile. Some say I am the heir of a hidden expert, others the successor of a great power outside sect territory. A few swear I come from a hidden family beyond Jin province, and that this is only a trial my clan arranged. The rumors get more outrageous every week. I know about them because senior brother Jo Shang-san tells me. He has been in the sect nearly 20 years and is warm toward me for no reason I can identify. Our buildings sit close together, so we end up at the cafeteria as a pair most days. His cultivation is only late-stage chi refining, but 2 decades in one place buys a man friends and an ear for everything. From him I have picked up sect anecdotes neither Jin Namwol nor Lim Young ever mentioned. While I ate, I took out my sect token, since both of them had sent me voice transmissions. Lim Young's came through soft and sweet with her usual gentleness in it, asking whether I was leaving the sect today and telling me to be safe on the road. I smiled and sent back, asking senior sister Lim whether she really did not need me to see her home. She comes from a small cultivator family the way I do. Hers stands a little better off than mine, because the Lim family old ancestor is an early-stage foundation establishment cultivator. The Lim family sits in the Wan Kingdom, a small country some distance from the Wool Kingdom. A foundation establishment cultivator holding the door gives them some say in the cultivator circles there. Lim Yang showed talent for alchemy young, and the old ancestor decided on the spot to put the whole family's strength behind her learning it. That backing is the only reason she reached Dan Peak of the Jeumhung sword sect and became an alchemist. She has carried the debt ever since, saving up medicinal pills every year to bring home at New Year. That is precisely why an alchemist's life has never made her comfortable. I want to get closer to Lim Young so her feeling toward me climbs faster, and putting in an appearance at the Lim family is an obvious way to do that. I had asked once already whether she wanted me to take her home. Her answer was the same as always, thanking me and declining, since the distance between the 2 kingdoms is not small and it would be too much trouble for me. The reason never changes, and I had expected it, because she has a strong sense of self-esteem and does not like troubling me with every small thing. Since she had refused again, I let it stand, telling her to take care on the road, and that I would come and find her after New Year if she had time. There was a silence on her side for a while after that. Then her voice came back soft and sweet, with a small tremor at the end, saying okay, and asking whether junior brother Ryuk would come to the Lim family when the time came. My lips curled and I asked deliberately whether senior sister Lim wanted me to come. The silence on her end was immediate and total. I could see her face without any difficulty, red to the ears and unable to produce a sentence. I stopped teasing and said that if the chance came I would like to visit. Her reply arrived fast and light as a breeze, saying okay, that she would tell her family in advance. I stored that transmission and opened Jin Namwol's. Hers jumped straight out at me, brisk as ever, announcing that she was about to set off and would see me at the outer sect plaza. When we were chatting a few days ago, she mentioned that the Jin family disciples all travel back as a group, and that besides herself, there were several others in the sect coming along. She had offered me a ride at the time, and since I now owned the flowing light flying boat, I declined politely. We still agreed to leave the sect together, and she said she would introduce the Jin family disciples to me. I was genuinely curious about them. They are a golden core clan with inter-sect disciples and a personal disciple inside the sect. Knowing them and making friends carries no downside I can see. I sent back that I would come over right away. Her reply took less than 2 breaths, saying all right, and adding that Young Yum would be there too, because she was coming to see us off. I was surprised and said senior sister Lim had not told me. Her tone turned mischievous, saying that girl wanted to give me a surprise. I asked, with some helplessness, why she had told me in advance then. She said to pretend she had said nothing since the surprise was for me and not for her. My eye twitched. I asked whether she was jealous because senior sister Lim was too good to me. She has been complaining a fair amount lately. Lim Yong now spends more time sending me voice transmissions than she spends with her best sister, and the two of them used to tell each other everything. Jin Namwol has begun to suspect I cast some kind of spell on the girl. Over at the Outer Sect Plaza, she stood under an old pine with her token in her hand and her mouth curled. She sent back, half joking, that it was entirely my fault for snatching Yong away. There was a pause on my end, then a new transmission jumped out at her, suggesting that she might as well join us too, so that she and senior sister Lim could go back to being good sisters. Jin Namwol was stunned. It did not land at first, and about 2 breaths later she worked out exactly what I meant. A blush came up on her pretty face and her earlobes heated, and shy and furious in equal measure, her hand tightened on the token. She said my name flatly and announced that she was going to tell Young. I had actually dared to say to her face that I wanted the two sisters to serve me together, and she was going to beat me up. The transmission had barely ended when Lim Yong's puzzled voice came from right beside her, asking Namwol what was wrong. Jin Namwol twitched. She put the token away fast, arranged a nonchalant smile, and slung an arm around Lim Yong's shoulder. It was nothing, she said, only telling that brat Rook Yong to hurry up. Lim Yong's gentle eyes flicked over her, wavered slightly, and she nodded and said, "All right then." I came across the plaza a while later. I was wearing the newly exchanged top-grade robe, cut in the same style as every other Outer Sect uniform, and somehow carrying an air the others do not have. When my eyes landed on Lim Yong, a flicker of surprise arrived on my face at exactly the right moment, as though I had no idea she would be here. I asked whether senior sister Lim had come too. She pressed her lips together and smiled, and in the morning light that smile came out exceptionally gentle, and she said yes, that she had come to see Namwol and me off. Jin Namwol crossed her arms and pouted, muttering that she was being listed last now. Young had changed, since she used to be named first and now ranked below this bastard Rook Young. Lim Yong went scarlet and waved both hands, insisting that was not it at all. I gave Jin Namwol an annoyed look and told senior sister Jin to stop bullying senior sister Lim all the time. Something sour rose in her chest at that, and she had no idea where it came from. She put it down quickly, turned, patted Lim Yong's shoulder gently, and observed with half a smile that some bastard really does care about Young. Lim Yong had nothing to say to that. She lowered her head and twisted the corner of her robe between her fingers, her earlobes red enough to drip. I watched the two of them and smiled, then stepped forward and took Lim Yong's hand as though it were the natural next thing to do. Her fingers trembled once in my palm, then softened, and she did not pull away. Jin Namwol looked at our joined hands with something moving behind her eyes. Then her mouth lifted and she went around to take Lim Yong's other hand, saying her brothers and sisters were waiting at the market, and we should head there first. The three of us walked out of the Outer Sect Plaza abreast. The morning wind came out from between the peaks and set our robes fluttering. Sunlight came down through the pine needles and laid broad, bright patches on the ground. Caught in the middle with me on one side and Jin Namwol on the other, Lim Yong thought that today's morning wind felt warmer than usual. In a private room on the second floor of the Jeumhong restaurant, at a round table by the window, 5 young men and women sat drinking spiritual chi tea. All 5 of them were surnamed Jin. At the head sat a square-faced young man in his 20s with a steady dignity between his brows. He wore the pale gold robe of a personal disciple of the Jeumhong sword sect. His name is Jin Huan. 2 men sat on his left. One was Jin Un, an inner sect disciple, handsome and elegant, with the corners of his lips permanently tilted up. He leaned back in his chair, holding his teacup at an angle that suggested it might fall at any moment. The other was Jin Myung, a quiet youth in outer sect attire who had said almost nothing all morning and appeared content to keep listening. On the right sat 2 beautiful female cultivators. One had short hair and bold, bright features and looked about the same age as Jin Huan, and her name is Jin Soha, an inner sect disciple like Jin Un. The other had a baby face and eyes that curved when she smiled, and her name is Jin Ran, also inner sect. Jin Ran took a sip of tea, remembered something, and looked up to ask whether Namwol would arrive soon, and whether third uncle had heard from her yet. Jin Huan smiled and set his cup down and said she had sent word a moment ago that she was waiting for a friend at the sect plaza and should be on her way. At the word friend, everyone at the table looked up. Jin Un tapped his fingers on the armrest and laughed, saying he had heard the surname was Rook. According to Jin Namwol, the man treated her well and was very wealthy, so the background was probably not simple. Jin Soha noted that the man was also an outer sect disciple, and turned to the silent one and asked Myung-ah whether he knew him. Jin Myung shook his head and produced 3 words, saying he did not know him. Jin Soha gave him a look of pure exasperation. As Namwol's younger brother, she said, he ought to pay more attention. It is rare for Namwol to befriend a male cultivator, and the least he could do was learn the man's background. Just then, Jin Huan tapped the table twice with a finger, It was not loud and the whole table went quiet anyway. He said his niece did not want the family investigating this Ryukyang. His gaze went slowly around the group before settling on Jin-un, and he told them not to be too direct later. Jin-un squirmed under the look and protested with an innocent face, asking third uncle why he was the only one being looked at. Jin Soha joined in cheerfully, saying it was because he is the least reliable person present. She bet he would be first to interrogate the man about 18 generations of ancestors. Jin-un felt the accuracy of that land, and being thick-skinned he showed none of it, rolling his eyes and calling it prejudice, and insisting he had no such thoughts and respected Jin Namol's wishes. Nobody at the table committed to an opinion on that. Jin Huan took out his sect token, checked it, and stood up with a smile on his lips, saying they had reached the marketplace and it was time to go. Jin-un was on his feet in one motion, laughing that they should go and see what the youth she kept mentioning actually looked like. Jin Ran said curiously that Namol had told her the youth was very good-looking, and Jin Soha grabbed her hand and said in that case they had all the more reason to hurry. The five of them left the private room, settled the bill at the counter downstairs, and pushed out into the street. With the end of the year close, the marketplace had gone festive. Red silk hung from the lintels of the shops on both sides, and some had handwritten couplets pasted up at their doors. The brushwork either vigorous or delicate depending on the hand. The main bluestone road was heaving with people, better than twice as busy as usual, voices and laughter and bargaining rolling back and forth through the alleys. They wove through it all the way toward the marketplace entrance. As they came near, they noticed the density of cultivators in that stretch was higher than anywhere else. A great many people were standing at the roadside doing precisely nothing, and their eyes kept drifting in the same direction. The female cultivators among them looked somewhat dazed, with a trace of trance sitting on their faces. The Jin family group looked at each other in confusion and asked what was going on, then turned to follow the general line of sight. On the open bluestone ground at the marketplace entrance, 3 people stood quietly, 2 young women and 1 youth. Both women were outstanding, one gallant and high-spirited, and the other of them should have drawn every eye on that street. Instead, everyone's gaze had slid off them onto the youth standing between them. His posture was as straight as a pine, and his features were so refined they did not read as belonging to a mortal. His skin carried a faint jade luster without a flaw in it. The smile on his face was gentle and clean, neither too strong nor too faint, sitting exactly where it should. He was doing nothing whatsoever. It still looked as though he were the only thing in color, and everything else had agreed to be the background. Jin Huan's breath caught. Jin Un's mouth fell open, and the folding fan he had been turning over dropped out of his hand and clattered on the stone, and he did not notice it had gone. He stared with his eyes wide and asked in open shock whether that was the Ryukyang Jin Namol kept mentioning, and what exactly was going on with the man's face. Even Jin Myong, who says nothing on principle, could not recover from it. No word needed saying and no cultivation needed showing, because simply standing there was enough to make a person feel in the gut that this one was not ordinary. Jin Soha and Jin Ran came back to themselves a full beat behind everyone else. Jin Ran quietly put a hand over her chest and discovered her heartbeat was running considerably faster than usual. Jin Soha looked away with some discomfort and took several deep breaths to get herself level. Jin Huan's expression, after the initial astonishment, turned gradually solemn. His eyes flickered as he studied the figure down the street. This junior nephew Ryuk seemed to carry a feeling of unity between man and nature, he said, and he asked whether the man had already begun comprehending the great Tao of heaven and earth. The other 4 were struck as though by lightning and turned their heads at him in unison. Jin Un's voice broke upward, demanding how that was possible, since initial comprehension of the great Tao of heaven and earth is supposed to begin at golden core. Qi refining polishes spiritual qi, and foundation establishment forges the foundation, and both are stages for laying groundwork, with comprehension of the great Tao arriving only after the golden core. Namwol had stated plainly that Ryukyang entered the outer sect not long ago, and stands at mid-stage qi refining. Jin Huan frowned, watched him a moment longer, and finally shook his head with his expression easing. Perhaps he was overthinking it, he said, and perhaps this junior nephew Ryuk simply has an extraordinary temperament that had produced a misreading. Jin Soha let out a breath and laughed, and said she was sure it was a temperament issue. Jin Huan composed his face, said they should head over, and took the lead. Jin Namwol was in the middle of talking with me and Lim Young at the marketplace entrance, when she caught the 5 of them coming in the corner of her eye. Her face opened into a smile at once, and she raised her arm and waved briskly, calling out to third uncle, to brother Un, to sister Soha, to sister Ran, and to Myung Ah. Lim Yeong and I both looked up at the sound. A smile came onto Lim Young's gentle face, and she waved lightly at them, since she has known Jin Namwol for several years and knows the Jin family people well. I was seeing them for the first time. My eyes went over the 5 of them one by one. Everyone carried something out of the ordinary, the particular confidence that comes from deep family backing and genuine talent. Jin Huan and the others arrived and greeted Lim Yong first with a smile, and Lim Yong answered gently. Then Jin Huan turned his gaze on the man standing beside her, which was me. The smile on his face was gentle and natural, and his voice was neither hurried nor slow. He said I must be Ryukyang, introduced himself as Jin Namwol's third uncle, Jin Huan, and said he had heard her mention me. I cupped my hands in a salute, casual and open, and called him third uncle. All 5 of them were taken aback. Jin Namwol's heartbeat jumped a few beats and her face went warm. What is this guy doing? She thought. Why did he call him third uncle the moment they met? Because anyone who did not know would assume there was already something between us. She took a deep breath, pushed the shyness down fast, and explained with a smile that Ryukyang and she are good friends, and that her family is his family too. Jin Huan and the others traded a glance, and something subtle passed between them. Then Jin Huan's warm, enthusiastic smile came back, and he picked up on what she had said. In that case, he would shamelessly accept it, he told her, and he would call me Yang-ah from now on. And how did that sound? I laughed freely and told him it was no problem. The moment Jin Huan stopped talking, Jin-un leaned in past his shoulder with his whole face lit up. He was Namwol's cousin, Jin-un, he told me, and I should call him Brother Un exactly the way she does. I went along with it and gave him the words he wanted. Jin Myung nodded next, holding something back in his expression, and introduced himself as Jin Namwol's cousin in a voice that did not quite make it across the gap between us. I told him he could call me Brother Yang, and his face went pink and he murmured a greeting back at the ground. I looked at him for a second and wondered whether the poor guy had a social anxiety problem. Then I turned my head toward the 2 women. Jin Ran and Jin Soha caught me looking at the same instant, and their faces colored and their eyes slid off to the side without either of them deciding to move them. Both of them were a little stunned. Where had Namwol found a friend who looked like this? And from the look of it, the 2 of us were not even Dao companions. Jin Ran shook the noise out of her head first and produced a dry laugh and said she was Namwol's older sister, Jin Ran. Jin Soha hurried in behind her with her own name. I nodded and greeted them gently as Sister Ran and Sister Soha, and the pair of them went briefly dizzy because he just called me sister. Jin Namwol watched the whole thing from the edge of the group with the corners of her lips lifting, in a mood she could not have explained if anyone had asked her to. Lim Young looked at me, and then looked at Jin Namwol, and pressed her red lips together while something flickered through her eyes. Jin Namwol seemed to feel that gaze land on her, because she startled and changed the subject fast, saying it was time to go, time to head home, asking whether Elder Wang and the others had arrived. She had barely finished when the cultivators around us broke into noise all at once. I followed everyone's eyes out toward the horizon. A flying boat was coming in fast between the distant mountains, jet black from end to end, its surface cut with formation patterns that were restrained and perfectly ordered. A small 3-story palace stood up off the deck. The hull ran about 20 zhang. Directly in front of the palace, a flag with the Jin character on it snapped in the wind, spiritual light crawling along the strokes. Jin Huan smiled and said it was here, and pride flashed through his eyes, and then he glanced at me without meaning to and could not help pausing. My expression was simply too calm. A flying boat of that size sweeping across the low sky pulled amazement onto every face in the crowd, and not the smallest ripple crossed mine. Jin Huan did his arithmetic quietly. A boat at that level is not transport but a statement of standing and strength. A man who can look straight through when either knows nothing at all or is used to seeing far grander things. I clearly belonged in the second category. His thoughts churned and his face gave away nothing, and he asked whether the boat coming to collect me would be along soon or whether I was heading back on my own. Jin Soha caught up to the same idea and asked with a smile whether I wanted to travel with them and take a lift. Jin Namwol pouted from the side and answered on my behalf. She had already invited me before, she said, and I was going back alone, since my home is a long way from the Jin family. Jin Un looked instantly crushed and said it was a shame, because if we had traveled together we could have played a few games of chess and the trip would not have been boring. I smiled and agreed that it really was too far, and said I would come to the Jin family to visit them all once I had time. His eyes lit right up at that. He slapped his folding fan against his palm and promised that when the time came, Brother Un would take me somewhere fun. Before the sentence finished, he felt an icy stare arrive from his side. His smile stiffened. He rubbed his nose and said nothing further. Jin Huan smiled, cupped his hands, and said they would be leaving first. Lim Young said her goodbyes to Namwol and to third uncle and Brother Un, and Sister Ran and Sister Soha and Myung Ah, and told her she would see her after the new year. Then Jin Namwol stepped forward and hugged her. When their bodies pressed together, I caught a faint fluctuation of spiritual power, and it was obvious enough what it was, because Jin Namwol was sending her a voice transmission. A moment later, Lim Young's face went red, and she patted Jin Namwol's shoulder gently while her lips moved on some reply I did not get to hear. Jin Namwol chuckled, let go, turned to wave at me, and announced in that crisp voice of hers that they were leaving. Jin Un and Jin Soha each took hold of one of the others, and the group rose on the wind and set down light on the deck. A white-haired old man had already been standing up there waiting, in a dark gray robe, thin-faced, his beard and hair combed with real care, his aura steady and pulled in tight. Jin Huan and the rest bowed to him the moment they landed and called him Elder Wang. Wang Yin only hummed at them. He was one of the Golden Core retainers of the Jin family, at Golden Core middle stage, which made him a top hand inside the whole clan. Every year at the New Year, he came out personally to collect the Jin family disciples and bring them home. For all that the Jin family is a respected Golden Core clan, it still has enemies. Disciples traveling without an expert over them are an invitation to trouble. Anyone who makes it into the Jiamhong sword sect is the backbone of the family's next century, and losing one of them opens a generational hole that takes decades to close. Protection like that is never something you skimp on. It did not take Jin Huan long to notice that Elder Wang was behaving strangely today. Wang Yin was normally as steady as a mountain, and at that moment cold sweat was running down his forehead and his color had gone off, as though he were holding up something enormous. Jin Huan and the others traded a silent look, and the same weight settled into all of them at once. Jin Huan asked carefully whether something had happened. Wang Yin stole a glance down over the rail toward the mouth of the marketplace where I was standing. He took a slow breath, and his body went tight. He asked the young masters and young misses who that young master had been just now and whether he was their friend or their enemy. They looked at each other. Jin Soha said she had no idea which young master he meant. Wang Yin's eyelid jumped, and he said it was the one who had been talking to them, the one with the rather extraordinary appearance, and every one of them understood at once. Jin Namwol smiled and said he meant Ryuk Yang, and that Ryuk Yang was a good friend of hers, and asked what was wrong. At the words good friend, Wang Yin visibly let go of something. His shoulders came down. He gave a wry smile and said that if I was a good friend, then it was fine. Jin Un could not hold the question in and asked whether there was a problem with Ai Yang. Wang Yin's expression shifted, and then he drew a long breath and went completely grave, and said that he had seen that young master standing very close to them, that in order to make sure they did not walk into anything he had locked on with his divine sense. And the result, he stopped there. Something close to fear moved across his eyes and did not bother to hide itself. Everyone on the deck held their breath. His mouth twitched, and he said slowly that the instant his divine sense settled on that young master, he felt a killing threat. That in that instant he knew with total certainty that the smallest move on his part would have ended him where he stood. Every face on the deck changed at once. What? How is that possible? The hushed exclamations came out almost on top of each other. Jin Huan's expression went through several shapes, and he said that Elder Wang was at Golden Core middle stage. He asked who on earth could put that kind of weight on him, and whether it could have been a Golden Core peak cultivator locking on. Jin Namwol could not swallow it either, and said that could not be right. Uncertainty rose in Wang Yin's eyes. He was quiet a moment, then let out his breath and said, one word at a time, that an ordinary Golden Core peak cultivator would also find it hard to press him like that. That he suspected there was an Ascent Soul True Monarch standing in the shadows. The air over the deck froze. Jin Huan and the others looked at each other with their faces gone blank, and the most lost of all of them was Jin Namwol. She tugged at the corner of her mouth, and her voice came out with something indescribable in it. She asked whether Elder Wang was telling her that an Ascent Soul True Monarch was secretly protecting that guy Ryuk Yang, that he had felt danger simply because he pointed his divine sense at him. Wang Yin nodded without speaking and let out another breath and said he was afraid that was exactly it, and that the moment he pulled his divine sense back, the danger vanished with it. The deck went silent again. Jin Soha surfaced first and turned to Jin Namwol with disbelief all over her face and asked what kind of background Ah Yang actually had. An Ascent Soul True Monarch protecting him in secret. Are you joking? An Ascent Soul True Monarch stands among the top handful of experts in the whole of Jin Province. Across the entire province, the Ascent Soul cultivators anyone knows about can be counted on your fingers. To get a power of that grade to lower itself and quietly shadow a chi refining youth, how monstrous does the thing standing behind him have to be? Jin Namwol was completely dazed by then. She shook her head blankly and said she did not know either, and that I had told her I came from a small family. The same two words appeared in every head on that deck. Yeah, right. Wang Yin took a deep breath and brought his agitation back under control, and his tone returned to its ordinary steadiness. He told young Miss Seven that he feared this young Master Ryuk did not want his identity exposed, and that they had best not go probing any further. Jin Namwol nodded without a word. She looked over the rail toward the mouth of the marketplace, where I was still standing in the same spot watching them go. Some light fell across me, and that figure of mine stood out in the crowd more than it had any right to. This guy, she thought. He keeps getting harder and harder to read. The Jin family boat hung in the air a while longer. Up on the deck, Jin Namwol and the others still seemed to be looking our way. Lim Yaeyong and I assumed they were drawing out the goodbyes, so we raised our hands and waved. Sure enough, the black hull started moving again a moment later. a slow aerial fortress folding itself into the layered skyline of the far mountains until there was nothing left to see. I pulled my gaze back and turned to the woman beside me and told Senior Sister Lim that I should be going too. There was still a trace of unfaded red on her face. She pinched the corner of her sleeve without noticing she was doing it, nodded, and gave me a sound so soft it barely counted as a word. Her mind was still running Jin Namol's parting voice transmission on a loop. Once we are gone, it will just be the two of you, young, so you have to be more forward. Lim Yang took a deep breath, then she took another one. Then she gathered up the courage of an entire lifetime, lifted her head and looked at me with nervous, gentle eyes. She said that junior brother Ryuk and she would not be able to meet again until after the new year, and asked whether we might, well, walk around together. I was stunned. Senior Sister Lim was asking me out to walk around. That had never happened before in recorded history. The smile came onto my face without waiting for permission, and I told her, of course, and said let us go. While I was still speaking, I reached over and took the small hand she had been using to torture her sleeve. She trembled, the way a rabbit does when something touches its ears without warning, and dropped her head fast. Her earlobes went a visible crimson, and her heartbeat came up into her own ears like a war drum. But a few steps in with her hand inside mine, her body let go of its tension by degrees, and her breathing came back down to something even. We walked hand in hand along the bluestone street of the marketplace and went deeper into the crowd. Everywhere we passed, people turned their heads to look, and none of them were subtle about the admiration. Lim Yong went shy under all that watching and stopped knowing what to do with her own hands and feet. My skin is considerably thicker, and I have been stared at for a long time now. I pulled her sideways into a roadside shop that dealt in magical artifacts for female cultivators. The place was crammed with a dazzling spread of goods. Every wall carried its own display of long skirts and jade bracelets and jade hairpins and hair ornaments and waist pendants. Every piece gave off a faint spiritual light until the whole room hurt to look at directly. There were a fair number of people inside, some of them women who had come alone, others Dao companion pairs huddled at the counter picking through things. Whispers and soft laughter went up one after another. We had barely got through the door when we noticed a pair of Dao companions not far off. The woman was looking down at a white jade bracelet she had tried on her wrist, her face full of delight and her eyes bright with it. She held her arm out to the man beside her and asked him sweetly whether the bracelet suited her. He was wearing a gray robe that had seen better years, and he looked out of place in a shop full of jewelry, uncertain where to stand or what to do with his hands. But he looked at the bracelet on her wrist and nodded in complete earnest and said it suited her quite well. Then he dropped his voice and asked the clerk nearby, carefully, how many spirit stones it was. The clerk had the standard business smile ready and delivered the answer with real efficiency. He called him fellow cultivator and explained that the white jade bracelet was a medium-grade magical artifact that calms the heart and spirit and triggers a protective shield. Wearing it lends a person an extraordinary bearing, he said, and it was a very popular style in their shop, with excellent value for money. That it came to only 500 low-grade spirit stones. At the words 500, the corner of the man's mouth twitched where anyone could see it. He was quiet for a moment. His eyes went to her face, still full of that delight, and something soft rose in them. Then he nodded and started to say that they would take it. He did not get to finish. She had already slipped the bracelet off her wrist and handed it back to the clerk, smiling, saying she had looked at it properly and the color did not match her skin tone after all. They should look at something else, she said. The man was left stranded and asked, bewildered, whether it did not look good on her. The clerk's smile froze for a beat before it recovered, and he agreed with the husband and told the fairy that the bracelet really did suit her. She shook her head and said, still smiling, that she wanted to look at something else. The clerk had no choice but to take it back, check it over carefully for wear, and bow himself away. Once he was out of range, the man leaned in close to her and whispered that he had clearly seen how much she liked it and asked why she had suddenly changed her mind. She kept her voice down too, and there was heartache under it. It is too expensive, she told him. Do the arithmetic. We still have to rent spiritual fields. We still have to rent an immortal cave. We cannot stop buying medicinal pills for cultivation. And you have monster hunting missions coming up. It is dangerous out there, so we need more talismans put by for self-defense. And which of those things does not cost spirit stones? She counted them off on her fingers one after another, and by the end of it, she was laughing at herself. She said 500 spirit stones is enough to buy an awful lot of things. He opened his mouth and then did not use it. After a while, guilt gathered in his eyes, and he took her hand gently. He said in a voice that had gone hoarse that once they had saved enough, he would definitely buy it for her. She nodded and smiled and told him she would hold him to that, and her eyes curved into crescents. The two of them smiled at each other, took hands and turned to walk out of the shop. Lim Yong and I had watched the whole thing from beginning to end. Her gaze followed their backs, and she gripped my hand back without noticing. Then she went up on her toes and leaned into my ear and said very softly that the two of them were so loving, her breath brushing my ear as she said it. I tilted my head to look at her, smiled, and lowered my voice on purpose to ask whether she meant loving like us. The courage she had spent all morning assembling evaporated on the spot. She dropped her head red to the roots and could not produce a single word. I smiled and raised a hand to call the clerk over. He came at speed, and his manner was far more respectful than it had been a minute earlier, and his back bent lower. After enough years of welcoming guests in a shop like that, reading people stops being a skill and becomes reflex. The two of us in front of him were wearing the robes of GM Home Sword Sect Outer Sect disciples, and our bearing was well past anything an ordinary loose cultivator could produce. He asked how he could help two distinguished guests. I tipped my chin toward the pair on their way out the door and told him quietly to fetch that jade bracelet and give it to them, and not to say who bought it. The clerk was stunned. Lim Young was stunned as well. She tugged my hand quietly and asked in a low voice why I wanted to give them the bracelet. She knew perfectly well that 500 low-grade spirit stones was nothing to me. She had heard Namwol mention that junior brother Rook was somebody who could turn 300,000 spirit stones into contribution points without so much as blinking. What she had not expected was that I would spend money on two complete strangers. And it was not only her, because the clerk's expression had turned genuinely interesting, and there was something odd in the way he was looking at me now. What kind of hobby is this? Handing spirit stones to people he has never met. I squeezed her soft little hand, blinked at her, and said with half a smile that it is rare to run into a pair of Tao companions as loving as we are. That I was happy, so we would call it a New Year's gift for them. Her face went red again, and she raised her hand and patted me lightly and told me shy and soft that junior brother Ryuk should be serious. I smiled and did not explain further. The truth is that what I had just said was not purely there to tease her. There was another reason, which is that the pair of them had actually moved me. The woman clearly loved that bracelet. Her eyes had been shining while it sat on her wrist. Her first reaction to the price was not to sulk or wheedle, but to walk through their coming expenses item by item. The spiritual fields and the medicinal pills and the talismans. She was thinking about the life the two of them still had to build. And the man, plainly short of money, had gritted his teeth and gone to buy it anyway the moment he saw how happy she was. That kind of arrangement, where two people think first about the other one, is not common in this life and was not common in my last one either. So since I had run into it, and since seeing it had put me in a good mood, I might as well spend a little money on them. 500 low-grade spirit stones genuinely meant nothing to me. My good mood is worth more than 1,000 gold. I was happy right then, so I was willing to pay for it.